Chapter 303. A single stone stirred up 1,000 waves. Hanjin raised his head, and a flying sword flashing with red light shot out, followed by a white light that chased after it. At the moment when the two collided, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly erupted, and then turned into a solid sword light that poured down in torrents, instantly enveloping everything within a radius of a few hundred meters in sword shadows that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The earth trembled and roared, and every sword shadow that hit the ground would leave a hole that was nearly a meter deep. Just as the sand and stones splashed up, another sword light fell, and the waves of dust and smoke that soared into the sky were more ferocious than the previous one. In the end, it even rose up a few dozen meters into the air. Not only here, but the entire underground city could feel the intense tremors. Finally, the sword shadows stopped, and other than the few meters around Hanjin that were still intact, the surrounding ground had inexplicably collapsed by a few feet, and the soil was loose and soft. The Minotaur's camp had disappeared into thin air, and even the tall flagpole had been smashed into pieces, leaving behind pieces of cloth of different colors that weakly rolled and fluttered on the ground. Everything had disappeared, including the ugly and sorrowful lives, including the excited and desperate moans. Their bodies had been crushed into powder, completely dissolving into the earth. For some lives, this was a kind of purification. For others, this was a kind of liberation. But no matter if it was the former or the latter, and no matter if they were willing or not, in the face of unparalleled power, they could only accept the final result. Perhaps this was the meaning of being strong. The smell of blood in the air became thicker and thicker. Hanjin suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. Wei Pu's tall figure appeared on the ridge of a roof, his hand holding a scythe, his body slightly arched, as if he was about to launch an attack. But he didn't move at all. Two gazes collided in the air, and on the surface, the two powerhouses gave off a feeling of tit for tat, but their eyes revealed their true inner thoughts. One was firm, one was cowering, one was quiet, one was panicking. One was full of playfulness, one was full of unwillingness. Although they didn't really fight, it was very clear who was stronger and who was weaker. Because he had witnessed the entire process of a powerful life form going from prosperity to decline, Hanjin had comprehended some things that had improved his mental state. It was also because he sympathized with Hazel and thought about the pressure that Sunir was under, as well as the various dangers that might befall her. Although he suppressed his emotions in time, there were some things that would explode even more fiercely the more they were suppressed. At this moment, the terrifying strength Hanjin released finally had the qualifications to look down on all abyssals. From now on, he no longer needed to feel ashamed when someone called him Dragon Slayer. After a long time, Hanjin moved his gaze away. He stepped on the soft soil and walked forward step by step. He walked out of the camp and onto the streets. Whip looked at Hanjin and didn't make a move. It was meaningless. Hanjin was the same. He knew that it was difficult to kill an abyssal demon in this kind of terrain, so he chose to ignore Whip and treated him like air. The other abyssal warriors rushed over from all directions of the underground city. The warriors who rushed to the front saw Hanjin and were immediately stunned. In fact, they were mentally prepared, but the terrifying enemy in front of them was strolling on the streets as if nothing had happened. What was the meaning of this? A silver line shot from afar and landed behind Whip. Whip took a deep breath and waited for a moment. Seeing that Alquite didn't have any intention to make a move, he said word by word, "Lord Alquite, this is already your territory. Can you really bear the unscrupulous contempt of a human? What's the hurry?" Alquite's vicious gaze moved bit by bit towards Hanjin. "My magic array will be completed in 2 days. If he dares to come in by then, ha!" And now? Whip sneered. "You're just going to watch that guy trample on your dignity? That guy is also trampling on your dignity, Lord Whip." Alquite replied with the same cold voice. "If you really can't bear it, you can go down. I won't stop you." Alquite's real purpose of forming an alliance with Whip and his brothers was to get rid of Zagund and ambush Hanjin. Now that he had control of the underground city and the magic array to deal with Hanjin was about to be completed, was there still a need to rely on Whip? To put it bluntly, it was already very kind of him not to choose to put away the bow after the birds were killed. Whip's eyes spewed out raging flames of anger, but the situation was stronger than him, so he could only choose to remain silent. Zack was seriously injured, Ball had not returned, so he should be in danger, and the other brothers had died one after another in the hands of Hanjin. He was the only one left, so there was nothing he could do. The Abyss soldiers blocking the way all stepped aside. Some principles could not be abandoned easily. As long as there was one time, the principle would no longer be a principle. Today, they had chosen to submit in front of Alquete, so it was only natural that they would submit to someone again. Moreover, Alquete had not issued any orders to attack from beginning to end, so the Abyss soldiers certainly would not make things difficult for themselves. Walking alone under the gaze of thousands of enemy troops was a very majestic, very pleasant, and very proud thing. However, Hanjin's expression was still very calm. When he walked to the end of the street, his unfocused eyes slowly looked towards the sky, as if he was thinking about something. After staying there for a long time, his body suddenly sank into the ground and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Asterisk, 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 let's not talk about how powerful the magic circle set up by Alquete was, or whether it could really trap and kill Hanjin. In this world, there was one thing that must be recognized and valued, and that was luck. In the past, when Hanjin went to the underground city to cause trouble, Alquete was too lazy to care about the underground city. Now that he had taken over the underground city, of course he had to protect his people, his dignity, and his prestige. Therefore, Alquete used his trump card and set up a giant magic circle that covered the whole city at all costs. Then, he proudly waited for Hanjin to take the bait. Who knew that Hanjin would mysteriously disappear? Hope, disappointment, hope, and disappointment. Alquete's time quietly passed in this repeated cycle. In fact, according to Hanjin's personality, he would definitely go to the underground city continuously. Even if he could only kill a few Abyss warriors and then retreat, it would be good. At least it would reduce the pressure on his warriors. However, Hanjin really did not have the energy to cause trouble. He needed some time to consolidate and digest the sudden improvement in his state of mind. Therefore, Hanjin went deep into the underground city, found a very quiet place, and then went into seclusion. This seclusion lasted for more than 20 days. Alquete, who was far away in the underground city, used the method of carrots and carrots to consolidate his rule. The few generals that Zagund once trusted were all killed, even though they had already surrendered. This was because Alquete did not know whether Zagund was alive or dead. He was afraid that once Zagund returned, those generals would work for Zagund again and threaten his rule. While being ruthless, Alquete also took into consideration the feelings of the Abyss warriors and promoted some new people. Moreover, he was very amiable and often chatted with the warriors of the different races. He did not put on airs at all. Unfortunately, after more than 10 days, Alquete could no longer smile. His face was gloomy all day long, and whenever he had time, he would run to the city wall and stare blankly. At this moment, Alquete really hoped that Hanjin would appear in the city and release all kinds of magical spells to attack the Abyss warriors. As for whether this hope was suitable for his status as a lord, Alquete did not care. After more than 20 days, Alquete's temper became more and more irritable. He would fly into a rage at the slightest provocation, causing the Abyss races to be shocked and afraid. They even try to find reasons to avoid contact with Alquete. As the saying goes, blessings do not come in pairs, and misfortunes do not come singly. On this day, Alquete had just finished throwing a tantrum when he suddenly received bad news. The Beatman's army was approaching the underground city. In terms of personal strength, Alquete was stronger than Zagund. However, in terms of military accomplishments, Alquete could not be compared to Zagund at all. It could even be said that he was a piece of trash. When a surface race's army entered the Abyss world to fight, it would definitely be difficult for them to advance. As long as the Abyss race's warriors firmly grasped the initiative, Even if Riptide had the experienced Dragon Knight Guevara, it would be difficult for them to win this battle. Therefore, after seeing Han Jin appear near the underground city and determining Han Jin's intentions, Zagun did not hesitate to immediately challenge Han Jin. This was because he could not give up the initiative no matter what. In Zagun's eyes, a personal duel was just a decoration of the entire war. However, in Alcuit's eyes, this war was a duel between him and Han Jin. This was completely contrary to Zagun's guiding ideology. What was more tragic and decisive was that Alcuit had killed all the generals with rich combat experience. Later on, his temper became worse and worse. From the beginning to the end, no one stood up to remind him of his mistakes. In this aspect, the Abyss Demon Whip was on par with Alcuit. 3 cobblers might be able to compare to 1 Zhuge Liang, but 2 fools put together would never be able to compare to Zagun. In fact, Han Jin's army was limited. If Alcuit sent out a large group of harassing troops, even if it was 4 or 5 of them, he would still have an advantage. However, Alcuit had always focused all his energy on Han Jin. His attitude was unusually firm and persistent. Therefore, some results had quietly become inevitable. At this moment, in the darkness, Han Jin, who was in seclusion, suddenly raised his head, revealing a pair of flashing cold eyes. After a moment, an extremely cold and cruel smile bloomed at the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Han Jin did not know where his army had gone. He only knew that something that should not have happened had finally happened. Since that was the case, he had no way out. After living in this world for almost 3 years, he knew very well that crying, begging, giving in, and so on would only make the enemy prouder and more arrogant. It would only make him more humiliated. Perhaps some people would say that an appropriate compromise was a good strategy, but Han Jin could not do that, because the struggle for hegemony and cultivation had completely merged together. On this path, there was never any compromise. What the cultivator faced was his own heart. What he had to break was the rules. If the heavens and earth were the masters, then the cultivator was the rebellious minister. How could there be any room for compromise? In the face of a destructive heavenly tribulation, was there any room for negotiation, begging, or using some kind of roundabout strategy? Without the heroic victory of the brave in a narrow path, without the arrogance of holding one's sword and laughing at the heavens, without the determination to kill gods and Buddhas in their way, this heaven-defying path would not work. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk in the sky above Fort Maxine. The god of war was still quietly hovering there. Han Jin had left, and so had Guevara and the others. Harley, the monkey, had finally become the king. However, he still had a sense of propriety. Other than constantly ordering the slave warriors to do this and that, he did not do anything out of line. At this moment, Harley was imitating Han Jin and leaning comfortably on the chair. He even hummed an unknown song in a low voice. It was a pity that the skull was as ugly as before and could not fully express his leisure and joy. Harley unintentionally opened his eyes and suddenly saw something. He straightened up and observed for a moment before saying in surprise, "It's snowing." Hogan was adjusting the magic crystal cannons. When he heard Harley's words, he first looked up at the sky. The weather today was very good. The sky was clear and blue, and there was no sign of snow. He then stood up and followed Harley's gaze. That's not snow, right? On the horizon, a long white line appeared. It kept rolling, pressing in their direction. Then what do you think it is? Harley asked. It looks like an avalanche. Harley glanced at Hogan from the corner of his eyes. Fortunately, he didn't have eyelids or pupils. Otherwise, he would have rolled his eyes to express his contempt. It hadn't even snowed before. So how could there be an avalanche? Moreover, this was a plane. How could there be an avalanche? Something's not right. Hogan's expression turned serious. He chanted an incantation in a low voice and released his clairvoyant eyes. Immediately, a scene that stunned everyone on the god of war appeared in front of them. It was not snow, nor was it an avalanche. It was a tide formed by silver Pegasi. The silver Pegasi were smaller than ordinary warhorses. They had fleshy wings on both sides. After running for a distance, They could spread their wings and glide in the air. Perhaps it was because they had the ability to fly that the silver Pegasi's appetite was more than 10 times that of ordinary warhorses. Their running and flying speed was also much faster than ordinary warhorses. Other than the elves, no lord could afford to raise silver Pegasi. They were the locusts of magical beasts. If humans could also eat grass, in comparison, a silver Pegasi's appetite could exceed that of 100 ordinary people. A group of silver Pegasi could even turn a grassland into a wasteland in a day. Even if they could raise a few silver Pegasi, they would quickly grow old. They needed the nourishment of the tree of life. However, these harsh conditions were no problem for the elves. When Guevara led his army to the Holy Crown City, he had already made sufficient preparations. The national strength and financial resources accumulated over the years were enough for him to launch a large-scale and long war. Instead of saying that he was defeated by the Silver Pegasi Legion, it was better to say that he was eaten alive by thousands of Silver Pegasi. Wherever the Silver Pegasi Legion went, not even a blade of grass was left. The newly planted wheat was eaten up, and even the bark was not spared. The Silver Pegasi were not picky eaters. They could eat cooked potatoes and bread. However, they did not eat meat. The elves did not like to go around killing people. Every time they conquered a city, they would at most kill the nobles' private soldiers, and the guards of the nobles. Then they would immediately retreat. However, the remaining civilians had no way of surviving because their survival resources were almost depleted. Bismarck suddenly sent out his army and usurped the fruits of victory. However, the national strength did not increase significantly. He still could not defeat Zagund. One of the fundamental reasons was that he did not gain much population. At that time, it was not an exaggeration to say that there were starving people thousands of miles away. Many cities and towns were simply empty. After 20 years, the Silver Pegasi Legion that had disappeared for a long time appeared once again. Their target was, of course, Fort Maxine. Harley suddenly jumped up. The Silver Pegasi Legion? Those from Wild Willow City. Harley habitually shut his mouth and looked around. He then realized that Sunir had already left. Julia was also not around. He then confidently continued, "Those despicable elves have indeed launched an attack on us. No, this is not the Silver Pegasi Legion of Wild Willow City." Hogan shook his head with difficulty. There are too many of them. There are too many of them. In his X-ray eye, the Silver Pegasi were like a raging tide that connected the heavens and the earth. There was no end in sight. Hogan had participated in large-scale battles before and had also been a commander. In the shortest amount of time, he could use his eyes to estimate the number of enemies. This was a basic ability, but Hogan was unable to do so. The Silver Pegasi in front of him had already disappeared from his X-ray eye, and the Silver Pegasi at the back continued to surge into his field of vision. What were the elves trying to do? Attack Fort Maxine? What a joke. These Silver Pegasi were enough to drown the entire Fort Maxine. If he had not been mentally prepared, and if he had not been on the God of War, Hogan would have collapsed on the spot. Against the human army of swordsmen and knight, the Pegasi Legion did not have the advantage. However, they were the bane of all mages and archers. The Silver Pegasi had the speed of lightning. Under normal circumstances, mages and archers only had time to launch one attack before the Pegasi Legion charged into the mages' battle formation. Then, it would be a one-sided massacre. Hogan had heard of his nemesis for a long time and feared him for a long time. When he suddenly saw this boundless group of Pegasi, he didn't panic and even judged that they shouldn't be Wild Willow City's army. This was already very rare. Most of the people on the ship were stunned speechless. Little Gold Bolt, who was standing on the side of the ship, suddenly flapped its wings and let out a clear cry. Looking at it, it seemed like it was ready to face any challenge. The rest of the Thunderbirds also began to cry. Little Gold Bolt suddenly turned its head and stared at Harley with its silver eyes. Chapter 304. Guevara and Lang Ning commanded the army to set up camp in the south of the underground city. The camp was located at the southernmost point of the plains, about 20 miles away from the underground city. Because they had no idea what Hanjin had done, and the cavalry they sent out earlier had not found Hanjin, Guevara was very cautious and tried his best to increase the strategic buffer zone between them and the underground city. After half a day of work, the camp was finally built. In the middle of the camp, Lang Ning was instructing the guards to tidy up the commander's tent. Suddenly, he felt his vision blur. Hanjin had appeared in his seat and was silently flipping through the documents that Lang Ning had just placed on the table. "Sir, you're here," Lang Ning hurriedly said respectfully. Things were different now. Hanjin was getting stronger and stronger, and his position was becoming more stable. His relationship with Hanjin was also changing. Hanjin raised his head and smiled. Guevara turned around and smiled as well. "You're just in time. The chair was just placed there, and you're already back. Why? Are you afraid of being robbed?" Although Hanjin's expression was calm and indifferent, he was not in the mood to joke. He coughed lightly and said slowly, "Was the journey smooth?" "Very smooth. After walking for so many days, I didn't even see a single monster." Guevara saw that Hanjin went straight to the point and was slightly stunned. He immediately noticed the change in Hanjin's temperament. In the past, Hanjin was elegant and had an otherworldly aura. Now, he seemed to be heavy and emitted an indescribable pressure. On the other side, Lang Ning had already sent people to spread the news of Hanjin's return. Not long after, Jed's, Yelena, Majordomo Gale, Sisuje, and the others gathered in the commander's tent. "I'm curious. Being so conservative is not Zagun style. If I'm not wrong, a lot of things have happened here, right?" Guevara said as he sat on the chair that Lang Ning had brought over. Hearing Guevara's words, everyone's eyes were filled with surprise, curiosity, and anticipation. All of them were focused on Hanjin. Hanjin thought for a moment and said slowly, "Zagund is dead." "Dead? How'd he die?" Although he noticed that Hanjin's temperament had changed a lot, he guessed that something very important must have happened here. However, he never thought that Zagund was already dead. The others were also stunned. They had temporarily given up on the Bite Man and risked their lives to step into the deep underground world in order to get rid of Zagund. Now that they had finally arrived at their destination, their enemy had inexplicably died. This feeling was indescribably strange. Hanjin told them everything that had happened in a calm tone. He did not deliberately exaggerate anything, nor did he slander anyone. He was just telling the truth. The tent was silent. Everyone was trying to understand the news, but Guevara's expression was very strange. The muscles on his face were particularly stiff, and his eyes were flickering. No one could guess what he was thinking. After a long while, Guevara sighed. "He died just like that? Just like that?" Guevara had said that no one could touch Zagund, and that Zagund was his. In fact, it was just a joke. Even if Hanjin killed Zagund on the spot, he would not bring up the agreement and complain. This was war, not a game. If Guevara really took the joke seriously, then he would not be the battle-hardened Dragon Knight. He would be a child who thought that he was the center of the world. Of course, he felt regretful, very, very regretful. "So, the current dungeon lord is that Alquite?" Majordomo Gale said slowly. "Yes." Hanjin nodded. "This is a little tricky. To kill that Alquite, we have to consider the reaction of the Bloodbreeds." Jedis' gaze fell on Guevara. "Knight Guevara, we are not familiar with the Abyss world. Why don't you tell us about the Bloodbreeds?" For people like Jedis, foresight was no longer an ability, but a habit. Even the young military genius Lang Ning would at most think about how to occupy the dungeon and how to kill the new dungeon lord Alquite. Jedis, on the other hand, had already imagined the future in his mind, where the Bloodbreeds would come out in full force to avenge Alquite. Guevara's expression was still blank, as if he did not hear Jedis' words. "There's no need," Hanjin said lightly. Jedis was stunned, and hurriedly added, "As far as I know, the Bloodbreeds have always been a significant part of the Abyss races. They must have something to rely on if they can do this. Sir, you must not be careless." "Yes." Majordomo Gale continued, "The strength of the Abyss demons, black dragons, undead creatures, and bone dragons is undeniable. For the Knight of Terror and the Blood Breeds to be ranked behind the three top races, their strength is definitely not what they have revealed. If they want to come out, even if we let Alquite go, they will still come out. Hanjin's expression was still calm. But killing Alquite, one of their ancestors, is challenging the bottom line of the Blood Breeds. Jeddis said, when you and Major Domo Gale set up a trap to ambush Alquite, did you already think about letting him go? Hanjin smiled. It's different now. Jeddis shook his head. We can't just let him slaughter our warriors, can we? Now, I don't think we need to kill him. We just need to occupy the dungeon and drive Alquite away. You are a priest. Isn't it your duty to destroy the dirty races that rely on the darkness? Hanjin said with a smile. Jeddis was a little speechless. I've always admired you because you're a true, pure priest. Hanjin lowered his head as he spoke and flipped through Lang Ning's document again. I know that there are many ways to fight, but I don't want you to lose your way when choosing or worrying about something. Jeddis closed his mouth, looked deeply at Hanjin, and didn't say anything else. I'm not a priest. It seems that I can only say it. Major Domo Gale smiled. Lord Raphael, after occupying the dungeon, we still have to face the threats from Wild Willow City and Holy Crown City. Even if we solve these problems, we will inevitably have a conflict with Cold Shadow City's Chasam in the future. My lord, I think you need some time to recuperate. We can't have more enemies. Knight Guevara once told me that Zagun's rise was not accidental, but inevitable. After saying this, Hanjin glanced at Guevara. Seeing that Guevara was still in a daze, he sighed inwardly and continued, I didn't understand at the time, but I do now. Major Domo Gale frowned. My lord, you mean the Abyssal race is actually willing to support Zagund? Although he is a dark druid, he is also a human. Don't you think there is something fishy about this? Unfortunately, by the time I thought of this, Zagund was already dead. I didn't have the chance to ask him face to face what happened after he entered the Abyss world. Major Domo Gale smiled bitterly. My lord, can you explain in more detail? Zagund, who had just entered the Abyss world, was still very young, and his strength was far from what it is now. In other words, he did not have the qualifications to make the powerhouses of the Abyss world take notice of him. Next, let's calculate the time. After Zagund entered the Abyss world, it was less than 2 years before he brought a large number of Abyssal race warriors back to the surface. Excluding the consumption on the way back, how long do you think he had to persuade the various Abyssal tribes and win their trust? And, at that time, was Zagund trustworthy? Hanjin paused. Finally, let's talk about how Zagund's army was formed. There were a large number of cavemen, minotaurs, evil eyes, medusas, and vampires. With so many different races willing to support Zagund, it is a miracle in itself. It is best not to believe in miracles so easily. I still don't understand. The bitter smile on Major Domo Gale's face deepened. For the first time, he had a feeling that he could not see through Hanjin. My guess is, Hanjin showed a thoughtful expression. Zagund won the appreciation of a powerful ruler, and that ruler's influence could penetrate into the vampires, at least a portion of them. With this assumption, it is possible to understand Zagund's rise. Even if your guess is correct, why? Why would that ruler help Zagund? As the saying goes, the onlookers see more clearly than the players involved. Major Domo Gale's initial goal was to make Hanjin let Alquite go, and the angle of his question was mixed with a hint of doubt, so he did not react for a moment. However, Jeds, who was beside him, suddenly raised his head, his eyes revealing a cold light. Testing, Hanjin said indifferently. Testing. Major Domo Gale felt as if he was struck by lightning. He immediately understood what Hanjin meant. If Zagund could rely on those Abyssal race warriors to conquer the land, then it was enough to prove that the overall strength of the surface races had become very weak after years of chaotic warfare. Thinking of this, Major Domo Gale felt a chill all over his body. He muttered, No, it's impossible, right? The Abyss world is as chaotic as the surface. How could they have the energy to reach out to the surface? If a Nicola can appear on the surface, then the abyss world may not always be a pool of muddy water, Han Jin said with a smile. This reminds me of a saying, the winds and clouds meet. Lord Raphael, did you guess all this yourself? Jed's asked with a serious face. More or less, but I don't know if my guess is the same as Knight Guevara's. Han Jin's eyes fell on Guevara again. Knight Guevara? Guevara still maintained the appearance of being in a trance. It seemed that Zagun's death had a huge impact on him, so much so that even the strong-willed Guevara lost control for a long time. Ha! Let's talk about this later. Han Jin shrugged his shoulders, then picked up the document. Lang Ning, is this the next step of your plan? Lang Ning was already thinking of a plan to attack the Holy Crown City. Of course, it was still very immature. The initial plan was to divide the army into two groups. Alexander would lead the slave warriors, who were the mountain warriors of the original Kormai city, to attack the Holy Crown City from the underground, while he himself would lead the Riptide to attack the Holy Crown City from the surface. Although the plan could not be changed quickly, and a sudden accident could delay his plan, or it could only be implemented after a few years, or even completely abandoned, the plan was indispensable. Even if he knew that it might be abandoned, he still had to work hard to perfect it. Only in this way could he be a qualified commander. Hearing Han Jin's inquiry, Lang Ning hurried over, pointing at the document and explaining it carefully. Jed's and Majordomo Gale first looked at each other, then focused their eyes on Han Jin. Different, definitely different. In fact, when Han Jin returned to the surface last time, they had already noticed that Han Jin was a little different from before, but it was not too obvious. But now, Han Jin was completely different from before. Suddenly, the door curtain was lifted and Chipango strode in. When he saw Han Jin, he shouted in surprise, "Sir, you're here." Han Jin smiled and nodded, but Lang Ning looked a little unhappy. He had always thought that Han Jin was too lenient to the people who followed him from the isolated Cliff City. He was discussing military affairs with Han Jin. How could he just interrupt? But he could not say anything, so he frowned and asked, "Chipango, what's the matter?" Chipango came to his senses. "Sir, just now outside the camp, I found a thief quietly approaching our camp. I wanted to wait for him to come closer, but he suddenly removed his invisibility spell, and it seemed that he had no evil intentions. I talked with him for a while, and he said he wanted to see you." "See me? How did he know that I was back?" Han Jin was a little confused. He didn't know. "I told him that you weren't here, and he said he could wait in our camp," Chipango replied. "Where is he?" "I asked someone to keep an eye on him." "Do you know his name?" Lang Ning asked. "He said his name is Kurtini," Chipango said. "Kurtini?" Guevara, who had been stunned for a long time, finally spoke. "You know him?" Han Jin was stunned. "If it's not the same name, he is Zagun's most trusted subordinate. He is an abyss mage, a 10th grade professional, and a thief. But I heard that he had a falling out with Zagun a long time ago." Guevara finished and sighed deeply, staring at Han Jin. When Zagun was dying, "Don't think too much about it," Jed's interrupted Guevara with a smile. "He's already dead, isn't he? Instead of wasting our energy on Zagun, why don't we listen to what this Kurtini wants to do here?" Jed's had good intentions. He also knew about the hatred between Guevara and Zagun. Only by diverting his attention elsewhere could Guevara's emotions slowly calm down. "Chipango, bring him in," Han Jin said. "Yes, sir," Chipango replied loudly, then quickly walked out. Not long after, a middle-aged man with a thin face, about 40 years old, followed Chipango into the commander's tent. His gaze stopped on Guevara for a moment, and Guevara snorted coldly, the sharpness in his eyes suddenly becoming incomparably sharp. The middle-aged man smiled helplessly and turned his gaze to Han Jin. "You must be Lord Raphael? Lord Zagund asked me to send his regards." The middle-aged man's words silenced the entire tent. Guevara, Jed's, and the others were all stunned. Even Han Jin was speechless. After a moment, Han Jin said coldly, "Which Zagund?" "Of course, it's the fallen Lord Zagund." The middle-aged man was tactful and did not keep Garen in suspense. He immediately told the truth. If Lord Zagund is still alive, I wouldn't be here. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Major Domo Gale said helplessly. Including now, he had played the role of the ignorant twice. It was obvious that Guevara had a grudge against the other party, so of course, he could not be soft. As for Hanjin, as the Lord, he also had to act like everything was under his control. It was not good for him to ask anything, so he could only step in. The last order I received was that if anything happened to Lord Zagund, I was to take my companions and surrender to the nearest enemy. The tent was silent again. After a while, Major Domo Gale frowned and said, "When did Zagund give you this order?" "About 3 months ago," the middle-aged man replied. "Didn't you have a falling out with Zagund a long time ago? Looks like that was just a facade you guys put up on purpose." Guevara said coldly, "Yes, your wisdom is like the morning sun." "Shut up, idiot. Don't talk nonsense with me, and don't treat me as Zagund," Guevara shouted. The middle-aged man smiled and then shut his mouth. He really didn't say anything else. Jeds and Major Domo Gale looked at each other. Even after being scolded by Guevara, the other party was still able to maintain a calm demeanor. He must have something to rely on. "Are you here just to say hello to me?" Hanjin asked in a flat tone. "I also brought a gift for you." The middle-aged man smiled and looked around. "No need to look. I trust them far more than I trust you. If you have something to say, just say it." Hanjin slowly closed the table and showed a thoughtful look. "The order he gave you 3 months ago?" His sense of smell is indeed sensitive, and he had already sensed the danger. But, looking at his behavior, he probably did not expect it to be so soon, right? "For the past 7 or 8 years, my companions and I have always been hiding in a quiet place. We have never approached Lord Zagund, so we really do not know what Lord Zagund is thinking." The middle-aged man replied softly, "However, since Lord Zagund asked us to pass the gift to you, I think your guess is correct." "What gift?" Hanjin leaned back in his chair and asked calmly. "My lord, it is not easy to explain it here. It is best for you to go to a place and see for yourself. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chitian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 305. After walking through 7 or 8 corridors, there was finally no road ahead. The middle-aged man, named Cortini, continued to walk forward, stopping in front of a tall wall. He stretched out his hand to pull apart a layer of moss that was half a foot thick and gently knocked on it. With a heavy twisting sound, the wall slowly rose up, and a few female elves came out from inside. Their eyes fell on Hanjin, Jeds, and Major Domo Gale, but they didn't say anything and just stepped aside. "Sir, please follow me." After saying that, Katini took the lead and walked in. Hanjin, Jeds, and Major Domo Gale looked at each other and followed in. In Riptide's commander's tent, Katini kept saying that he wanted to pass on the gift prepared by Zagund to them. Everyone, including Hanjin, was very curious about the mysterious gift. As for whether or not this was a trap set by Zagund, the possibility was infinitely close to zero. Katini was an old subordinate of Zagund. He personally admitted that he had fallen out with Zagund a long time ago, but that was just a pretense deliberately set up by them. Whether this was true or not, it didn't have anything to do with Alquit. To put it bluntly, it was impossible for Alquit to win Katini's loyalty in such a short time. Moreover, Katini was also a human. Coupled with the few night elves that appeared just now, and what Guevara told them about Katini's past, Hanjin had no reason to suspect anything. "Those elves don't look too good. It seems that Zagund's death has dealt a big blow to you," Jed said softly. "It's nothing." Katini's footsteps paused, and he replied faintly in front of them, "Anyway, they have to pay a painful price for this." "They? You mean Alquit?" Jeds asked. "No, I mean everyone. We've been walking for so long. Where's the gift you mentioned?" Major Domo Gale's tone was full of anger. "Why are you in such a hurry? You'll see it when you walk out of here." After walking for about 400 to 500 meters, the area in front of them suddenly opened up. A dense red light rushed towards them. Looking further ahead, Hanjin and the other two revealed shocked expressions. In the center of the plain, there was an incomparably huge conical mountain peak. They were about 20 to 30 li away from the mountain peak, but they had to look up to observe it. They estimated that the mountain peak was at least several thousand meters tall. Compared to the huge mountain, everything around them seemed so small. The uneven piles of rocks were like grains of sand, and the strangely shaped trees that grew between the rocks were no different from moss. They were like ants walking among the sand. The strangest thing was that the top half of the mountain was bright red, like a piece of red-hot iron. At the top of the mountain, twisted smoke rushed out in a ferocious manner, forming a giant pillar with a radius of 1,000 meters straight into the sky. "What's that?" "A volcano," Major Domo Gale murmured. "Sir, please don't go any further. The air here is full of poison, and the temperature is very high. It's dangerous," Katini said as he cast a magic shield on himself. He then slowly rose into the air and flew towards the giant mountain in the distance. Major Domo Gale knew that Katini was not exaggerating. He reluctantly retreated into the crevice, where he dared to breathe. Jeds also cast a magic shield on himself and flew into the air. Hanjin turned back and exchanged glances with Major Domo Gale. He leaped up with his sword and instantly overtook Katini and Jeds, quickly approaching the giant mountain. "Sir, danger, danger!" Katini's faint cry came from behind. The green light stopped abruptly. In fact, there was no need for Katini's reminder. Hanjin already felt the pressure from the sword light. Moments later, Jeds and Katini arrived one after another. As the saying goes, a mountain will cause a horse to stumble. Looking at it from a distance and observing it from up close, this volcano gave off a completely different feeling. In the giant crater, there was a sea of boiling hot lava. Suddenly, it spewed out a cloud of mist and emitted sparks that swept hundreds of meters into the air. The crater was too large. Almost every moment, there were hundreds of clouds of mist spewing out. That was how the pillar of smoke that covered the sky and earth was formed, and it also let out a deafening roar. On the north side of the crater, there was a small gap, as if someone had gently taken a bite out of a bagel. Every time the lava near the gap rolled, a small stream of lava would flow out of the gap and gather at the foot of the crater, piling up into a small pool. Of course, it was small in comparison to the volcano. In the end, it formed a lava river that slowly flowed towards the south. Not far from there, the lava river will split into two and then drill into the ground. Katini pointed toward the south. 2 lava rivers? They'll all pass near the underground city in the end, right? Jed said word by word. He often followed Nicholas, and although his battle experience could not be compared to Zagun's, the difference was not that great. Seeing this incomparably huge volcano and thinking of Zagun's gift, he immediately understood what Katini was going to do. "Yes, my lord." Katini smiled. Jeds was speechless for a long time. After a while, he sighed. "It seems that our army coming here is a little unnecessary. If you lead the lava out of the volcano, all the Abyss warriors except for the vampires will die." "Vampires? That's not necessarily true." Katini's gaze lowered and fell on the ring on his left pinky finger. After a moment of silence, he took off the ring and threw it towards the crater. Although Katini was a dual cultivator, his own strength was limited. According to the trajectory of the ring, there was no way it could land in the crater. However, a shocking scene happened. When the ring was still 700 to 800 meters away from the crater, a puff of green smoke suddenly rose, and then the ring disappeared without a trace. I believe both of you have noticed the color of the lava. The temperature here is frighteningly high. Not to mention the vampires. Even steel will turn into ashes if it gets close to the crater. Katini pointed at the foot of the volcano. "Look, there's very little lava flowing out from the gap. The heat contained in the lava dissipates easily in the air. Even so, the lava is always white. It only turns bright red when it flows into the ground. If we make the gap bigger and make the lava flow faster and fiercer, I can guarantee that the lava will still be white when it reaches the underground city. Are the bodies of those vampires tougher than steel? When did Zagund discover this volcano? Hanjin asked softly. About a year ago, Katini replied. And you have been staying here all this time? Yes. Katini nodded and said, My lord, you should know that this volcano poses a serious threat to the underground city. If it is discovered by the enemy, even if all the grand magi on the continent come, they may not be able to save the underground city. If Zagund is not dead, this gift is prepared for me, right? Hanjin smiled faintly. Katini did not know how to answer this question, so he could only lower his head. How can you guarantee that all the lava will flow out? What if it is blocked in the underground river? Jedis asked, My lord, you must have seen many lava rivers since you arrived in the Abyss world, right? Why are there tall cliffs on both sides of each lava river? Katini smiled. Because lava can corrode rock layers. As time passes, the lava river will naturally lower and lower. In fact, the underground river is much wider than we thought. There is no possibility of it being blocked. Moreover, Lord Zagund left many dark seeds on the walls of the underground river. As long as the seeds start to germinate, the walls will collapse in a short time. Collapse. My lord, the impact of millions of pounds of lava is unimaginable. Collapsing walls will not block the river. Instead, it will increase the impact of the lava. Zagund actually planted dark seeds in the underground river. It seems that he was prepared for this day. Jedis frowned. Why? This time, Katini was silent for a long time before he replied. My lord, you may not believe it, but when Alquit first came to the underground city, he proposed that he lead the Blood Clan to attack isolated Cliff City. Not only did Lord Zagund reject his proposal, he also tried to stop Alquit. Isn't the expansion of the dark forces in line with Zagund's wishes? Jedis said. And you did not answer my question. Why? I don't know. Katini shook his head. I've always felt that Lord Zagund is very wary of the abyssal race. Haha, he is not too muddle-headed. Hanjin said faintly. Katini, do you still remember the order that Zagund gave you? Of course, that was my lord's last order. Katini smiled bitterly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. He had been restraining himself from missing Zagund to avoid being suspected. After holding in for so long, he could not control himself anymore. Repeat it. Lord Zagund's emotions seemed to be a bit unstable, and he said a lot of meaningless things. However, I've been carrying that order with me. My lord, do you want to see it now? Katini said, then we will have to go back. The temperature here is too high. I will turn it into ashes in an instant. No need. Hanjin pointed his sword finger, and the green light under his feet suddenly grew brighter, enveloping Katini in it. The flickering light also dyed the magic shield released by Katini into a green color. Katini hurriedly took out the secret letter and handed it to Hanjin. Hanjin took the letter and read it carefully. After a while, he handed it back to Katini. Keep it as a memento. It is best not to show it to anyone else. Understood, my lord. Katini breathed a sigh of relief. On one hand, he was touched that Hanjin did not destroy the secret letter. On the other hand, he did not need to express his opinion anymore. Zagund had made it very clear in the letter that he was also a high-level professional and had his own dignity. There were some things that he could not say shamelessly. What did the letter say? Why can't I read it? Jedis asked curiously. It's nothing. The things that Zagund wanted to express are a bit confusing. Hanjin paused, but I think he has already noticed Alquit's strange movements, so he gave the order. If something happens to him and Alquit becomes the new lord of the dungeon, then Katini and the others have to surrender to us and tell us the secret of the volcano. Jedis was silent for a moment. When did Zagund plant the seed of darkness? My lord, it has been more than 3 months. Lord Raphael, you have already been to the dungeon at that time, right? Jedis asked. Hanji nodded. Katini continued. Yes, at that time, the hexagram array was all ready. Before he could finish, he saw a cold light shoot out from Hanjin's eyes. He immediately understood that he had said something wrong and hurriedly shut his mouth. Hexagram array? What six-pointed star array? Jed's looked surprised. Katini was a spy left behind by Zagund, so of course he knew what Hanjin had done. However, he also realized that Hanjin must have deliberately concealed the matter at that time. He had made a big mistake by leaking it, and he regretted it too much. How could he answer Jedi's question? Jedis pondered for a moment, then slowly turned his gaze to Hanjin. Hanjin felt a burst of helplessness. With Jedi's intelligence, using other excuses to cover up or explain would be almost useless. More importantly, he could hide it from Jedis, but he could not deliberately deceive Jedis. These were two completely different things. If he chose the latter, it would be very likely to plant a barrier between the two of them. I'll tell you later, Hanjin said softly. Okay. Jedis was straightforward. Of course, he also understood that the hexagram array must have something to do with Hanjin. Now, we should go back and inform Guevara to prepare to retreat. The lava doesn't distinguish between friend and foe, Hanjin said. On the way back, Hanjin asked Katini many questions, such as the number of abyssal mages under his command, the method to blast open the breach, and so on. It can only be said that racial barriers were very difficult to break. In Zagund's mixed army, the humans always got along well with the elves because they all came from the ground and their bodies and appearances were similar. Who would want to be friends with a monster full of tentacles? The people Zagund assigned to Katini were either humans or elves. There was not a single abyssal warrior. This also meant that the only people who could truly make Zagund trust were the races from the ground. In the end, he had no right to blame anyone for betrayal. Even he was secretly on guard. So why would Alquite really trust him and support him? It took almost half a day to go back and forth, and the warriors of Riptide had already recovered their energy. Guevara, Lang Ning, and the others gathered in the commander's tent to discuss how to launch the attack. The first sentence Hanjin said after entering the commander's tent stunned all the generals, prepare to retreat. Lang Ning was stunned for a long time, and hurriedly asked, Sir, retreat. Why should we retreat? Jedis, you explain. Hanjin sat on the main seat and looked at the map in front of him. He couldn't help but shake his head. Some parts of the map were drawn by him, but it was useless now. If the lava hidden in the giant volcano really flowed out, the surrounding terrain would change drastically, and the dungeon would be turned into ruins. Jedis told Guevara everything that they had seen and talked about. Guevara's expression changed again and again. He understood that when Zaganide first discovered the volcano, he was only worried that it would be used by the enemy. Later, Zaganide changed his mind, and he no longer had the confidence to fight against Hanjin. Thus, the volcano became his trump card. At the critical moment, Zaganide would definitely retreat with his army and leave the underground city to preserve his strength. However, the moment they tasted the fruit of victory, they would be drowned by the overwhelming lava. As for ordering Katini to surrender to them, it was only a contingency plan that he had prepared after discovering Alquite's abnormality. Strictly speaking, the volcano was prepared by Zagund for them. That guy, he's still as vicious and cruel as before. Guevara sighed. In fact, it wasn't just him. Hanjin was also scared. Fortunately, he decided to sneak into the dungeon alone to contain Zagund's army, and he also seized the opportunity to severely injure Zagund, which led to a series of events that led to Zagund's death on the spot. Otherwise, they would have fallen into a trap. In the face of the surging lava, he could escape, and Jedis and Yelena also had a chance to escape. However, Guevara, Majordomo Gale, and the others definitely couldn't. Zagund's vicious plan was enough to destroy the force he worked so hard to build. Kurtini paused for a moment, obviously dissatisfied with Guevara's evaluation, but he closed his mouth in the end. He had already surrendered according to Zagund's last wish. If he still remembered his former leader, it would be easy for him to be criticized. Of course, he couldn't just forget about Zagund. Not to mention whether he could get past himself. If he did that, people would definitely look down on him. The key was the word degree, and it all depended on himself. If we can end the war quickly, we may be able to rush back to the Bite Man before Wild Willow City and Holy Crown City launch their attack. Lang Ning suddenly said. The Bite Man doesn't belong to us anymore. Han Jin smiled. He didn't want to say it at first, for fear of shaking everyone's fighting spirit, but the dungeon was no longer a threat. His enemies now were Dismark and the elves of Wild Willow City. What? Everyone was stunned again. In other words, we have no home now. Han Jin's tone was very indifferent. But we could go back to Black Raven City. So fast. Lang Ning shouted. Because Wild Willow City's strength is very strong, far beyond your previous estimation. The God of War was his magic weapon. At that time, he didn't hesitate to release his spiritual sense into the God of War, and saw Wild Willow City's attack in an instant. Chapter 306. Han Jin kept making hand signs, and the green ray turned into a flash of lightning, constantly striking the mountain peak. Countless large and small stones fell down like raindrops, falling into the depths of the lava river, splashing out waves of fire. However, the inertia of the lava itself was far greater than that of an ordinary river, and the falling stones were washed away in the blink of an eye. However, the mountain peak had been struck more than 100 times, and the cracks were getting bigger and bigger. Finally, a few boulders about 7 or 8 meters in diameter were peeled off the mountain and fell into the lava river one after another. The huge roar spread for more than 10 miles, and the ground trembled slightly. The splashing lava even flew up to a cliff nearly 100 meters high. Han Jin continued to make hand signs, and the green ray's spinning speed became faster and faster. With the support of the boulders, the stones would not be washed away so easily, and finally formed a high earth dam, blocking the lava river. Han Jin saw that it was about time and recalled the green ray, then found a place to sit cross-legged and adjust his breathing. In order to prepare for the upcoming battle, he must maintain his full combat strength. After a moment, Han Jin slowly opened his eyes. Jeds had been standing not far from Han Jin, looking at the upper flow of the lava river, muttering to himself in silence. Jeds, what are you thinking about? Han Jin asked as he stretched his body. I'm thinking about Wild Willow City. Guevara said yesterday that Wild Willow City could not be so powerful. They should have formed an alliance with other elven tribes. That's not what I'm thinking about. Jeds shook his head. Sir, do you think to occupy the Bite Man, they need to mobilize such a powerful army? Not to mention that our army has already moved underground. Even if we stay in the Bite Man, we are still no match for Wild Willow City. They should know the real situation of the Bite Man. I feel that they are just swinging a big hammer to smash an ant. It's really unnecessary. You mean they have ulterior motives? Yes. Jeds pondered for a moment. If I'm not wrong, Dismark of the Holy Crown City is going to be in trouble. Han Jin narrowed his eyes, thinking about Jedis' judgment. What Jedis said was very reasonable. If they wanted to occupy the empty Bite Man, Wild Willow City didn't need to go all out. Moreover, Wild Willow City and Holy Crown City had already reached an agreement to attack the Bite Man from the east and west respectively, so there was no need for them to go all out. In the last war, Dismark didn't rescue Wild Willow City's Silver Pegasus Legion at all. He only cared about usurping the fruits of victory. This must have angered Wild Willow City's Senate, but they were too heavily injured and didn't have the strength to launch a counterattack. They could only swallow their anger, Jedis said. This time they finally seized a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. My lord, from their point of view, we went deep underground to fight Zagund. No matter who wins, their strength will be greatly reduced, and they won't be able to pose a threat to the surface for a short period of time. In fact, they should regard Dismark as a real enemy. Defeat Dismark, occupy the Holy Crown City, and then send out a few thousand elves, and Black Raven City will become their territory. Although Black Raven City is a wasteland, the elves have an incomparable advantage in this regard. In a few years, they will completely restore Black Raven City to its former glory. Seeing that Han Jin was silent, Jeds continued. Wild Willow City, Bite Man, Black Raven City, and Holy Crown City all belong to the elves, which has already formed an encirclement around isolated Cliff City. The isolated Cliff City's Chamber of Commerce Alliance and the Mercenary Association. Do they have any other choice? No matter if they are sincere or not, they only have one choice in the end, and that is to surrender. All in all, the elves' territory is equivalent to 7 provinces. If they take a few more years to digest the fruits of their victory, no one will be able to stop the rise of an elven empire. It's just that. Jed's thought for a moment. I don't know how they feel about Depew City and Cold Shadow City. If they continue to attack and really eliminate Chasam. I heard that Grand Duke Solomon of the capital of elements and Forza of Fado City are rivals. But when that time comes, they will have to unite, and only by uniting can they resist the rapidly rising elven empire. What you said is too far away, Han Jin said lightly. My lord, a man without foresight is bound to have immediate worries. Do you think I will do nothing? Han Jin smiled. Besides, their first judgment was wrong, and our strength has not been reduced. At this moment, a faint explosion came from afar, indicating that another lava river had been blocked. Han Jin sighed softly. It has begun. Alquite was restless. The movements of Han Jin's army were very strange. They had just arrived near the underground city, rested for half a day, and then retreated to some unknown place. Alquite wanted Whip to scout, but Whip rejected his request in the name of taking care of his injured brothers. Alquite could not personally scout. He had just taken control of the underground city, and there were too many factors to consider. He did not dare to let go. Sending other warriors to scout was no different from sending them to their deaths. Just yesterday, nearly 100 vampires had died near the Riptide Regiment's camp. This was his foundation, and he couldn't afford to waste any more of them. Just as he was thinking hard, the ground suddenly trembled slightly. Alquite was stunned, then stepped out of the room, turned into a silver bat, and flew into the air, looking in the direction of the tremor. However, the abyss world was too dark, and no matter how good a vampire's eyesight was, he could not see the scenery in the distance. After a moment, another tremor came from another direction. What was going on? Alquite suddenly felt very uneasy. Unfortunately, he was not an astrologer and could not find the source of his uneasiness. After waiting for a long time, there was no other movement. Alquite slowly descended to the ground. Unexpectedly, the moment he turned into human form, a violent tremor came from behind him. Compared to before, not only was the tremor much stronger, but it was also continuous. The ground was trembling, and so was the vault. Countless dust and small stones fell from the vault, sprinkling in every corner of the underground city like a continuous spring rain. Alquite hurriedly rose and flew in the direction of the tremor. He flew very fast and arrived at the city wall in a moment. There were many evil eyes and Medusas gathered there, staring blankly into the distance. They also did not know what was going on, but every warrior felt a little uneasy. The tremor continued, and Alquite understood that something bad must have happened. This was also the reason why Han Jin withdrew the army. A temporary scouting team formed by hundreds of vampires flew out of the underground city and immediately divided into 3 groups, flying in 3 directions. 2 of the teams flew to the blocked area of the lava river. They saw the earth dam and immediately found that the lava had risen to the middle of the cliff and would overflow after another 50 meters or so. They circled half a circle, then flew back to the underground city. The earth dam was obviously man-made, and they had to report what they saw to their ancestors immediately. The other scouting team flew to the edge of the plains, but they did not find anything unusual, nor were they attacked. They were bolder and flew south along the giant rock that connected the vault. When they passed by the lava river, they suddenly found something strange. The lava was originally dark red, but now it was extremely bright, and a pungent gas came out of the lava, forming a gray smoke. The vampires flew down diagonally, wanting to fly closer to observe more carefully. Being in midair, they couldn't feel the tremors of the earth. They could only vaguely see the rocks on the ground trembling like sieves. Soon after, a huge white wave gushed out from the entrance of the underground river and met those vampires head-on. In just an instant, dozens of vampires were turned into ashes. The ground shook more and more violently, and the white-hot lava continued to spurt out, making a deafening roar. The tip of the wave, made entirely of lava, was at least 100 meters tall, and the lava river could not hold so much lava. In the blink of an eye, lava gushed out and rolled to both sides. The dark abyssal world was getting brighter and brighter. At this moment, Alquite and the warriors on the city wall could clearly see what was happening. A thick red light was spreading all over the place. There was even a faint smoke in between. In two directions of the underground city, a dazzling white line was extending from one side to the other at an extremely fast speed. Then, it turned into a surging wave. The underground city was surrounded by tunnels in all directions, but most of them were blocked by Zagund, and the rest were blocked by the warriors of Riptide. The thickness of the lava was getting thicker, and the first wave was already close to the underground city. The warriors of the Abyss race on the city wall screamed in despair. Some were running around like ants on a hot pan, some rushed down the city wall and ran towards the center of the city, and some were dumbfounded. The speed of the lava flow was not very fast, but it was very stable. The towering and majestic underground city seemed particularly fragile in the face of this torrent of destruction, especially the tall city gate. Before the lava flow hit, the city gate had already turned into a ball of raging fire and then collapsed. The white-hot lava slowly flowed into the city through the city gate. The endurance of the living beings living in this city was far inferior to that of the special city gate. Wherever the lava passed, the houses would burn one after another. Balls of burning flesh and blood clashed and screamed in agony. Then, everything became silent. In front of the irresistible nature, all resistance and struggle were so pale. No matter what orders Alquite gave, no one would listen to him. The lava that came from the north and south gathered in the center of the underground city, and then rolled along the streets. Countless lives were quickly disappearing. This place had completely turned into a huge purgatory. Alquite himself was safe and sound. His majestic spiritual power was enough to protect him from harm. Compared to the lives below that were turned into charcoal and ashes, this was the meaning of being strong. However, Alquite's expression was not good. His cheeks were originally very pale, but now they were pale and bloodless. His pupils were unfocused, and he stared blankly at the endless lava. His body was trembling slightly, especially the fingertips of his hands. They were trembling especially badly, just like a drunkard who had been drinking for many years. Will's figure flashed, and he appeared beside Alquite. His brother Zark also appeared. He was calmer than Alquite, and his eyes were constantly looking around. Will was looking for his own way out. The defense of an abyss demon was not high. The surging lava on the city wall made him feel like he was being pricked by needles. The innate ability of an abyss demon, teleportation, could only be used in an unobstructed space. It was impossible to pass through the lava and the ground. The problem was that the plains were full of lava, and the tunnels that used to be scattered all over the place were all swallowed up by the lava. Where could he escape to? Zark's performance was very bad. He held the giant scythe with a weak hand, and the giant scythe was trembling violently. If it was more intense, it would look like he was fighting with someone. The injuries that Zagund had inflicted on him had not yet recovered. In fact, Zark was very weak now. Of course, he still had the ability to teleport. One by one, the bats flew into the air, forming a black fog. They stuck close to the ground and flew forward. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the ground, and a dazzling white light bloomed. Under the white light, hundreds of bats screamed in panic. Their formation was immediately thrown into chaos. Some crashed into the ground, some crashed into their companions, and some even flew toward the lava below. The bats that the vampires transformed into were different from the magic bats on the continent. They still had to rely on their eyes to observe their surroundings. Without vision, they naturally lost their sense of direction. Alquit immediately discovered Hanjin. He roared, and his body turned into a silver line. The distance of nearly 1,000 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Unfortunately, Hanjin had already disappeared into the ground. Among all the strong humans on the continent, only Hanjin could maintain his full combat strength in such a harsh environment. Therefore, Hanjin refused Jed's and Yelena's request to join the battle. Edwina's figure was firmly engraved in the depths of his soul. Some mistakes once was enough. Seeing that Hanjin had disappeared, Alquit could no longer control the anger in his heart. He punched out, and a fist force condensed from pure mental strength hit the place where Hanjin had disappeared, leaving a 2-meter-deep crater. Some of the weaker vampires were dizzy from the shock and ran around randomly, causing the already chaotic formation to become even more chaotic. Will looked coldly at Alquit's back, snorted, and said in a low voice, "Zark, follow me. That direction." "Got it, boss," Zark replied with a trembling voice. Will and Zark released instant transmission one after another, flashing in the thick red light. Abyss demons didn't have the ability to fly, but they could use instant transmission to make up for their shortcomings. When their bodies appeared in the air and were about to fall, they would immediately release the next instant transmission. Therefore, to them, it didn't matter whether they had the ability to fly or not. Will wanted to find a way out near the entrance of the lava, but he desperately found that more and more lava was pouring in, and there were no signs of it drying up. The air was also getting hotter and hotter. Will's thick and heavy hair first curled up, then his hair became messy. He used all his potential to reduce the time he paused as much as possible. Every time he released instant transmission, he desperately looked around, trying to find a way out. As the saying goes, time pays off. Wep finally discovered a pitch-black, semicircular tunnel at the edge of the plain. The bottom of the tunnel had already been swallowed by lava. Because the tunnel was relatively high, there was still a space of about 2 meters above it. The lava was still slowly rising. Will understood that if he missed this opportunity, he and his brothers would be dead for sure. "Zark, over there!" Will roared, and then released instant transmission. Zark also discovered the tunnel, and his face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He didn't hesitate and immediately released instant transmission. After a few instant transmissions, Will finally appeared at the entrance of the tunnel. Although he had already made sufficient preparations, and he kept his body parallel to the lava as far as possible, the distance between him and the lava was still too close. The weakness of an abyss demon was revealed at this moment. In an instant, the soft armor Will was wearing turned red, and all the exposed skin turned grayish-black. The aroma of barbecued meat filled the air. The weakest part of a person's body was the eyes, and so were abyss demons. Otherwise, they wouldn't have repeatedly suffered at the hands of Hanjin. Will's eyes suddenly couldn't see anything, and at the last moment, he discovered that there was a dead end in front of him. Will let out an unwilling roar, and used his feet to support himself at the entrance of the tunnel, and his body shot forward like lightning. Riptide soldiers had too many tasks, and time was tight. It could be said that Will was lucky. The soldiers in charge of this place had only carelessly dug out the tunnel, and under Will's reckless impact, a hole was created. The next moment, Will scrambled to crawl through the hole. He could only crawl. His legs had only stayed above the lava for a few breaths of time, and they had already become completely stiff. Then, Zark also appeared at the entrance of the tunnel, but his perseverance was far inferior to Will's, and he wasn't mentally prepared enough. Zark suddenly let out a roar and used his hands to cover his eyes. This unnecessary action made him lose his last chance of survival. Although he also used his feet to support himself at the entrance of the tunnel like his brother, and shot forward, his strength was too lacking. In the end, Zark's head went through the hole, but his lower body slammed into the lava. He only stayed there for a moment, and his body was already half-cooked. The result of letting his legs withstand the white-hot lava's test was inevitable. Hanjin relied on sword light to protect his body, and he also used the spirit possession technique. His defense was much stronger than an abyss demon's, but he only dared to watch from afar and couldn't approach the volcano. Zark's body was even worse, and he instantly turned into tiny specks of dust, blending into the lava. Zark let out a final cry, and then his body twitched twice before he stopped moving. Chapter 307. Although most of Will's skin was scorched and his eyes were severely burned, he still had his hearing. When he heard Zark's roar, he turned around and groped around. He grabbed Zark's shoulder and pulled him over. Of course, he only pulled his upper body over. However, when the nerves of the body were injured, the sense of touch would often become very chaotic. Will didn't notice anything wrong at all, and he knew that the lava would surge over sooner or later. He didn't dare to delay for a moment, and staggered towards the back of the tunnel. After running for more than 10 steps, Will felt that Zark's body was frighteningly light. A moment later, a mournful roar came from the depths of the tunnel. Zark, in another place, in order to escape, Alquite's performance was as crazy as Will's. Unfortunately, due to fear and despair, the vampires all moved closer to their ancestors, blocking Alquite's line of sight. If Alquite discovered Will's movements and chose that tunnel to escape, with his powerful and majestic mental strength, he would definitely be able to rush out unscathed. One after another, waves of fist energy bombarded the vault of the earth. Emotions could be contagious. Sensing the fear and despair of his descendants, Alquite's heart, which didn't have much courage to begin with, became even more panicked and lost all rationality. He actually made the most stupid choice, which was to open a tunnel in the vault of the earth. The lava was still slowly rising. The world here had already turned into an oven. The unimaginably high temperature caused the air to boil. Vampires constantly lost their strength and fell down. However, before their bodies touched the lava, they began to burn fiercely, like falling meteors. This magnificent scene was as if a grand magus was releasing a forbidden spell, meteor fire rain. There were fewer and fewer vampires around Alquite. Even Zagun's nominal wife, Lindsay, lost her strength and fell down involuntarily. If she had known that this day would come, perhaps she would have chosen to stand up and stand with Zagund at his most desperate moment. However, regretting the past when facing death was no longer meaningful. Alquite was still throwing out punches with all his might. To him, the lava was nothing. It was nothing if his people all died. The problem was that there was a terrifying enemy hiding in the dark, conserving his energy and watching covetously. The longer he stayed in this harsh environment, the more his strength would decline. At that time, it would be impossible for him to fight against Hanjin, so he had to escape as soon as possible. After throwing out countless punches, Alquite completely relied on his own mental strength and blasted a cone-shaped hole more than 50 meters deep in the dome. Hiding in the hole, it was difficult for the heat of the lava to seep in. Even so, there were only a dozen vampires left under Alquite's feet. Alquite had just heaved a sigh of relief when he suddenly realized that the rock above him had begun to squirm. He originally thought that it was an illusion caused by using too much strength. He shook his head hard and realized that not only was the rock squirming, it was also growing rapidly. No! Alquite roared and threw out another punch with all his might. With a loud bang, Alquite's punch not only shattered the newly grown rock, but also deepened the hole by a few meters. Hanjin sat on the other side of the dome. His left hand waved like a butterfly, and streaks of 3 true flames hovered in the air, burning quietly. Flow of the 5 elements, grow and multiply without end. Hanjin formed a spell and shouted, "Go!" The dozens of streaks of 3 true flames hovering in the air exploded neatly and scattered on the ground like raindrops. The moment each flame touched the ground, it would turn into a cloud of shiny black dust, and then disappear into the depths of the dome. Alquite threw out both of his fists continuously. The dome continued to shatter and grow. Alquite's face became more and more ferocious, and Hanjin's forehead was sweating slightly. This was a contest between the power of Taoism and the power of another world. However, Hanjin had the advantage. He used the three true flames to create the true void soil, giving the dome a strong regenerative power, just like the legendary living soil. On the other hand, Alquite only used strength to resist. It was obvious who had the advantage. Hanjin only used 10% of his strength to create a threat, but Alquite had to use 10% of his strength to break it. Boom, boom, boom. The dome continued to tremble. The remaining 10 vampires could not withstand the violent shockwaves at all. They fell down one after another with cries of pain. Alquite desperately realized that even though he had released all of his mental strength, the speed of his destruction could not keep up with the speed of the dome's regeneration. His body was retreating bit by bit. Finally, Alquite was completely forced out of the hole. The corner of his long robe suddenly emitted a wisp of green smoke, and then it burned. This meant that Alquite's mental strength was beginning to weaken. Alquite's eyes lit up with a thick silver light, and the flame at the corner of his robe was immediately extinguished. His fist swung upwards again. With a boom, a hole about 3 meters deep appeared in the dome. However, just as Alquite retracted his fist, the hole was filled with rocks that kept growing. Alquite screamed and wanted to throw out another punch, but Hanjin's figure had already appeared hundreds of meters away, looking at him with a smile. Alquite finally found a target to vent his anger. His body suddenly turned into a silver line, shooting towards Hanjin. Hanjin rode on his sword and flew backward. He did not want to confront Alquite directly at this time. Never compromising was just his attitude towards this world, but the way he fought was varied and colorful. The civilization that Hanjin had truly inherited was the best at trickery. As the saying goes, using trickery to break through 1,000 pounds, using 2 peaches to kill 3 soldiers, going with the flow and going against the flow, and so on. Every attribute in the 36 stratagems was a clear indication of the art of trickery. In this purgatory, a silver line was chasing after a green light, swimming rapidly. Alquite was fast, but Hanjin was not slow either. After his state of mind had a breakthrough, his figure riding on the sword became more agile and graceful, always able to avoid Alquite's attacks in time. After an unknown amount of time, Alquite finally stopped chasing in despair. He glared at Hanjin. His long robe was slowly becoming charred, but he was powerless to stop anything. That's it? You're ready to say goodbye to me? Hanjin also stopped. His calm smile was like a sharp blade, deeply piercing into Alquite's heart, making Alquite feel unbearable pain. Don't be complacent. The blood breeds will not let you go, Alquite said with difficulty. It doesn't matter, Hanjin replied calmly. Although he had always looked down on Alquite, he still paid enough attention to him in battle. He did not want to easily get close to a powerhouse at the peak of the 12th level who was good at close combat and had fallen into a desperate situation, even though his opponent was already panting. Alquite took a deep breath. The air had already become boiling. In a situation where his mental strength was almost exhausted, Alquite's mouth and trachea were immediately burned. Large and small blood blisters appeared, and then they simply became charred black. This was an unimaginable pain, but Alquite seemed to feel nothing. Then, from the depths of his heart, a roar of unwillingness erupted. Alquite's body shrunk abruptly, then expanded abruptly. Countless cracks appeared on his skin, and thousands of drops of blood shot out in all directions with his body as the center. An invisible pressure hit the dome of the earth, causing it to tremble violently. The invisible pressure hit the ground again, and right below Alquite's body, the lava that had accumulated more than 10 meters high gushed out, revealing the ground that was red from the heat. Hanjin once again became the shameless rat that Alquite spoke of. Before the roar erupted, which was the moment when Alquite's body suddenly shrank, Hanjin had already cast the earth-shrinking spell. Then, a ray of green light disappeared into the depths of the vault of the earth. After a few breaths of time, Hanjin appeared in another place. He cast the earth-shrinking spell again and instantly approached Alquite. A ray of red light shot out from his mouth, slashing towards Alcuit's neck. Alcuit had already lost all of his strength, and many parts of his body were ignited in flames. With a slash of his sword, the head that looked like a duck's egg suddenly flew high into the air. Han Jin seemed to be unsatisfied. He pointed with his sword finger, and the red light flew up again, cutting Alcuit's head diagonally into two halves. "Why is there no more?" Han Jin revealed a disappointed expression. Then, the green light rose up and disappeared into the vault of the earth. After a moment, Han Jin appeared in a dark tunnel. After walking for a dozen meters, there was a fork in the road ahead. Han Jin did not hesitate for a moment and slowly walked into the left tunnel. Half of Zark's body was lying not far ahead. His giant scythe was thrown away somewhere, and his charcoal-like body emitted an unpleasant burnt smell. Han Jin stopped beside Zark's body, waved the green light, and directly penetrated the back of Zark's head. Then, with a forceful flick, Zark's head exploded. After putting another magic crystal into his space ring, Han Jin turned around and walked back. This time, he chose the right tunnel. After walking for about 100 meters, Han Jin suddenly stopped. There was a pile of high gravel on the side. It looked like it was caused by the earth walls falling off naturally due to lack of maintenance. Han Jin smiled and raised his hand to release the green light. With a flash of cold light, it passed through a distance of more than 10 meters and directly shot into the pile of gravel. With a scream, Will suddenly sat up from the pile of gravel and rotated his giant scythe. However, Han Jin was more than 10 meters away. His giant scythe only thing he could do was leave a deep mark on the wall opposite him. How did you find me? Will stared with his empty eyes, as if he was asking the air in front of him. Because I left a mark on your body. No matter where you run, I can find you. Han Jin lightly replied. Ha! I've already become a blind man. Will turned his head. He had already caught Han Jin's position, and my injuries are very serious. Even if you don't look for me, I won't be able to live for long. Like this. You still don't want to let me go? You know, I need your magic crystal. Han Jin's voice didn't carry any emotion. Yes, I know. Will's voice trembled. Zagun's coldness was because of loneliness, and Will's coldness was because of the sadness of being a prey. Even if a frog saw a snake, it was like a sparrow seeing an eagle. Right, I want to ask you a question. You don't have to answer. Han Jin paused. Do you know Donald? Donald? Wei Pu suddenly froze. Yes, I didn't want to answer any of your questions, but this really makes me excited. Will began to laugh wildly. Huh, great Lord Raphael. Did you provoke Lord Donald? I didn't provoke him, but one day in the future, he will provoke me. Han Jin lightly said. Do you know what Donald means in the ancient elven language? Will's expression was very strange. There was excitement, expectation, and joy in others' misfortune. His injuries made him feel pain every moment, and his face was very ugly. All of these added together made Will look like an evil spirit that came to collect debts. The abyssal race can also use the ancient elven language. Han Jin smiled. In ancient times, the Elven Empire was the most powerful, and the Elven language became the common language of the continent. Later, with the decline of the Elven Empire, the Elven language was gradually forgotten. Will revealed a sinister smile. Lord Raphael, let me tell you, Donald means the leader of the world. Do you now understand what kind of opponent you have provoked? Ha ha, idiot, a name is always just a name. If I name my dog Donald, will the dog also become the leader of the world? Han Jin said unconcernedly. You don't understand. Lord Donald is the most outstanding monarch of the abyssal world. The more Will spoke, the more excited he became, completely forgetting his injuries. He is also the eternal pride of us abyssal demons. Donald is also an abyssal demon? Han Jin frowned. Abyssal demons were indeed a headache. Although he already had the strength to suppress Will, if he really wanted to kill Will, he would have to use a lot of methods. No, Lord Donald is an abyssal great demon, the strongest person in the abyssal world who has the inheritance of the god of death. Will laughed wildly. Even an angel of light is not Lord Donald's opponent. Lord Raphael, I'm sorry to tell you that you are dead. Becoming Lord Donald's enemy is equivalent to receiving the call of the god of death. Haha. Thank you for your reminder. Han Jin indifferently said, however, I have already collected 7 space magic crystals. In the near future, I will set up a very mystical magic array. No one will be able to harm me and my friends, including that so-called leader of the world. You. Wei Pu suddenly woke up from his excited imagination and faced the bloody reality. Your brothers have all left? I can't let them wait too long, can I? Han Jin said with a smile. No, Will roared, his figure suddenly pouncing towards Han Jin's position, but he was seriously injured and had been stabbed by Han Jin, so his last attack had no power at all. Han Jin pointed his sword and the cyan light fell diagonally, cutting off Will's neck. Will's tall body fell heavily to the ground, his head first hitting the wall, then rolling a few times on the ground before stopping at Han Jin's feet. Riptide's speed was very slow. The deep tunnel could at most allow 2 knights to walk side by side, and they had to leave a small path beside them in case of emergency. No matter what, they couldn't fill up the tunnel. Although they could use the power of the supervolcano to deal with the enemies in the underground city, the situation they were facing was still not optimistic. The elves had already taken over the Bite Man, cutting off their way back. They couldn't hide underground for too long, and a lack of sunlight and hunger were all threats that couldn't be ignored. Fortunately, Han Jin had an outstanding think tank around him. Although it couldn't be said that their decision was the best, it was at least the most suitable for the current situation. The conservative way was to return to Black Raven City and recuperate there. They agreed with Jedi's judgment. Wild Willow City had dispatched such a large military force. Their goal was definitely not just a Bite Man. The elves must have included Dismark in their plan. Before defeating Dismark, the elves wouldn't touch Black Raven City for the time being. They would wait for the development of the situation before deciding when to join the war. However, Guevara, Jedis, and Major Domo Gale all chose another countermeasure. It could be said that they were not conservative people. They would sneak into the Holy Crown City's sphere of influence from underground and wait for the right opportunity. If Dismark couldn't resist the elves' attack, they would ally with Dismark, and Dismark would have no reason to refuse. If Dismark could defend the city to the death, then they would have to wait for a longer time. The elves' intention couldn't be hidden from them. They would launch a blitzkrieg war with the largest military force at the moment, when everyone thought that the elves wouldn't send out their troops. They would completely end the war before winter arrived. Guevara and the others had noticed the elves' unusual movements before, but they thought that the elves would choose the beginning of next spring to start the war. This was also the main reason why they were eager to eliminate Zagund. Although the elves' choice caught them unprepared, it also pushed the elves to the edge of the cliff. Winter was coming, and the elves were the most unbearable race on the continent. Therefore, the elves' attack would be very fierce, and Dismark would also spare no effort to resist. It was inevitable that both sides would suffer. When winter came, the elves would suddenly come out from underground. How could the exhausted Holy Crown City resist their attack? Then they would chase after the elves who had to retreat because of the extreme cold. The future would still be in their hands. As for how the situation would develop after the beginning of next spring, it depended on whether they could successfully occupy the Holy Crown City, and whether they could inflict heavy losses on the elves' army. No matter how critical the situation was, Guevara, Jedis, and Major Domo Gale would never be discouraged. In the words of Another World, they must seize the initiative and create the initiative even if they didn't have the initiative. In fact, when a young Commander Lang Ning learned that the elves had occupied the Bite Man, he was very depressed. But under the encouragement of these 3 big shots, he became confident again because he saw hope. Chapter 308. Most of the people had already left, but Jedis, Major Domo Gale, Yelena, and the others had not. As true experts, they were not in a good mood because they had tasted the pain that Sunir, Morrisons, and the others often felt. Han Jin was fighting the enemy in the terrible purgatory, and they could only hide here and wait for news. Whether they were sincerely loyal to Han Jin or temporarily on his side for some reason, they were not afraid of fighting. The problem was that Han Jin always chose battlefields that were beneficial to him, or rather, only to himself. Everyone else, regardless of friend or foe, would be restricted to a certain extent. From an emotional point of view, they felt that they should do their part, but from a rational point of view, they knew that if they forcibly participated in the battle, it would likely cause trouble for Han Jin. After all, Jedis, Yelena, and the others were top-grade and super-grade professionals, and this would hurt their self-esteem. Suddenly, Han Jin's figure came out of the cave wall. Everyone was used to Han Jin's unpredictable movements, and most of them ignored him. Jedi smiled and asked, "How's the underground city?" "Those who deserve to die are all dead," Han Jin said lightly. "What about those who didn't deserve to die?" Jedis felt that Han Jin was implying something and hurriedly asked, "They're also dead." "You." Jedis didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said, "I thought you were the one who didn't deserve to die." "Raphael, are you okay?" Yelena asked softly. When a person expressed comfort to another person, they should look directly into the other person's eyes. But Yelena's eyes were somewhat erratic, as if she didn't dare to look at Han Jin. It was really difficult for her. Major Domo Gale had secretly talked to her several times, asking her to find a way to get close to Han Jin, but Yelena had only rejected others and had no experience in this area. Furthermore, Major Domo Gale wanted her to take the initiative to pursue him. This was like asking someone who had never drunk wine to evaluate the taste of wine, or asking someone who had never seen the sea to describe the magnificence of the sea. It was inevitable that she would feel at a loss. "Of course I'll be fine." Han Jin smiled and said, "Yelena, I've noticed that you've become more and more concerned about me recently. Do you have no confidence in me?" Or, before he could finish his sentence, Han Jin suddenly shut his mouth. Although it was very dark here, he could still see the blush on Yelena's cheeks. "Sir Raphael, you must have gained a lot, right?" Major Domo Gale coughed and changed the topic. "Not bad." Han Jin frowned. "But Alquite is already at the peak of the 12th level. How could he not have magic crystals?" "Magic crystals?" Major Domo Gale was stunned. "Sir Raphael, you don't think that all the strong people on the continent are magical beasts?" "Giant dragons have magic crystals, so do abyssal demons. I think vampires should have them too." "That's different." Jedis shook his head. "Why? This?" Jedis smiled bitterly. "Sir Raphael, you've really stumped me. I think only the god of creation can answer this question. Do angels have magic crystals?" Han Jin changed the question. "I've noticed that you're very interested in magic crystals." Jedis was shocked and asked tentatively, "If angels also have magic crystals, you wouldn't want to hunt angels, would you?" "Of course not. I'm very devout in my belief in the god of light." Han Jin smiled and said, "I'm just asking." "Sir Raphael, lying is not a good habit, not to mention that you're telling a lie that even a child wouldn't believe." Jedis once again showed a dumbfounded expression. "I've been by your side for a long time. How come I've never felt your devoutness?" "Devoutness is in the heart. It doesn't mean that you're devout by wearing a believer's robe and praying to the god of light all day long." Han Jin's words were actually the fallacious logic of the Buddha. Jedis was stunned for a long time and couldn't find the right words to refute Han Jin. Of course, regardless of whether he could refute it or not, he would never believe that Han Jin was a devout believer. "Yelena," Han Jin said. "Ah." Yelena was in a daze and didn't know what she was thinking. When she suddenly heard Han Jin call her name, she hurriedly replied loudly. This time, not only did Major Domo Gale and Jedis notice that something was wrong, but even Leger, who had been standing on the side and hadn't said a word, also noticed the abnormality and turned his gaze to Yelena. "Do you still have the space magic crystal I gave you last time?" "Yes." "Give it to me first." Han Jin stretched out his hand. Yelena didn't say anything and took out the space magic crystal from her space ring and placed it in Han Jin's palm. "Why don't you ask me what I'm going to do?" Han Jin smiled. "I remember that you were very, very happy when I gave this magic crystal to you. Now that I'm taking it back, are you willing to part with it? What's there to be reluctant about? Yelena whispered. And I know that it's far more meaningful for you to use these magic crystals than what I want to do. You really trust me. Hanjin paused and said slowly, I want to use these 7 space magic crystals to set up a large magic array. Don't worry, it'll surprise you. Really? When it came to magic, Yelena's expression became much more natural. Of course it's true. Will it be more powerful than the magic array you set up in the Terrashaw Mountains? I don't know. Hanjin pondered for a moment. However, what I'm going to do this time is to challenge my limits. It may succeed, but it may also fail. Fail? Yelena couldn't help but widen her eyes. For ordinary mages, it wasn't unusual for magic to fail. Even Yelena had failed at times, but Hanjin was different. Although she couldn't sense Hanjin's magic power, Yelena knew that Hanjin's power was already above hers. He might even have become a true superior. Even with Hanjin's strength, he was still so cautious, and there was still a possibility of failure. One could only imagine how amazing the magic array was. Yes, Hanjin nodded. That's why I'm going to wait for a while. Right now, I'm not very confident. Jeds and the others fell into silence. They were very interested in the large magic array Hanjin mentioned, but they couldn't ask. On the one hand, it was because of their identities, and on the other hand, it was because this was Hanjin's secret. If Hanjin wanted to tell them, he would naturally tell them. If Hanjin didn't want to tell them, it would be inappropriate for them to get to the bottom of it. Alquite is also dead. After a moment of silence, Jeds suddenly asked, I seem to have said it just now. Those who deserve to die are all dead. Understood. I just wanted to confirm it again. Jeds sighed softly. After hearing this news, I should be very relaxed and happy, but I only feel a kind of sadness now. The compassion of a believer. Hanjin smiled. No. Jed shook his head. Alquite was, after all, a peak 12th level powerhouse. His strength far exceeded mine, Majordomo Gale's, and Knight Gavara's. For him to be killed by you so silently, I feel like I'm dreaming. Soundless? Ha! Alquite's performance was very crazy at that time. You just didn't see it. Hanjin said softly. In fact, his strength far exceeded mine. If we fought on a fair battlefield, I wouldn't be his opponent. What is fair? Majordomo Gale said disapprovingly. How many years did Alquite live? Lord Raphael, how many years have you lived? To be fair to him is to be unfair to you. I'll pass this news on to Knight Gavara. He's been waiting like us. Jed said slowly. Let's go together. Hanjin looked ahead and whispered, we still have to go through a difficult time before we can return to the surface. There's one person who will definitely have it harder than us. Majordomo Gale laughed. Asterisk, 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 Majordomo Gale was right. There was indeed one person who was anxious, but his expression was always calm. At least no one around him could see his emotional fluctuations. Dismark never dreamed that Wild Willow City would suddenly turn against him. To be precise, it had been less than 10 days since he signed a new treaty with Wild Willow City. But in these 10 days, there had been earth-shattering and irreversible changes. The new treaty stipulated that the 3 main cities of the Bite Man would be owned by Wild Willow City, while Fort Maxine and Black Raven City would be owned by Dismark. In fact, Dismark had already given away the biggest benefits. Although Black Raven City's territory was very large, after years of war, it had become a wasteland. The total population of Black Raven City was not even half of Fort Maxine's. Who would have thought that the elves, who had always kept a low profile, would suddenly become crazy? They were not satisfied and raised their butcher's knife against Dismark. Fortunately, no matter how smooth the situation was, he never forgot to be cautious. When he went to Fort Maxine and Black Raven City, he only sent out 2 swordsman legions and half a knight legion, which was only a quarter of his total military strength. The most important magic legion was always in Holy Crown City. Otherwise, he really did not know how he could support the current situation. Looking at the surging elves outside the city, Dismark's heart was filled with sorrow. He knew that the warriors he had sent out were probably dead. But where did Wild Willow City get so many soldiers? Did they join forces with other elven tribes? My lord, they're attacking again. Gerald, who was standing in the corner, said in a low voice. Dismark looked back at his most trusted subordinate and waved his hand. Gerald turned and walked towards the city wall. Come on, come on. Dismark took a deep breath. He was the best at defensive battles. His iron shell tactic had once caused the arrogant dragon knight Gavara to suffer greatly, and had caused the ferocious Zaganide to be defeated several times. Today, he would let the elves have a taste of his power. A gray-black curve appeared in the distance, slowly approaching the Holy Crown City. It was a battle formation formed by thousands of treants. Dismark did not dare to be careless. He immediately issued an order, and the magic squad began to adjust the muzzles, ready to attack at any time. Treants were 8th-level holy animals, but in the hands of the elves, they had become experienced soldiers. They could understand the orders of the bugle and advance or retreat in unison. Although the treant's movement speed was so slow that it made one's hair stand on end, if the group of treants was allowed to approach, the consequences would be unimaginable. What was even more frightening was that even if they were to continuously destroy the treants with their cannons, the elves could still release life magic to revive the treants. Even if the treants were blown into pieces, they would still turn into countless lush and moving plants. They would form a green barrier to block the cannons and protect the warriors behind them. Dismark had no experience in fighting against a large number of treants. He was caught unprepared and suffered great loss. The Holy Crown City was almost captured by the elves. However, Dismark was very experienced in fighting. He immediately adjusted the deployment and finally defeated the elves. However, he also paid a considerable price for this. 2 of the 9 magic towers in the city had been destroyed by the Silver Pegasus Regiment. At that critical moment, he really did not have the energy to take care of the Silver Pegasus Regiment. He could only concentrate all the forces to attack the treants and the plants that were getting closer and closer. As long as 3 of the 9 magic towers were opened at the same time, it would be enough to protect the whole city. Dismark had spent a lot of money to build 9 magic towers in the Holy Crown City, in order to provide the city with a continuous defense. Moreover, the Holy Crown City had hundreds of magic crystal cannons. Together with the well-prepared magic squad, the whole city could be called an iron wall. However, under the impact of the elves' lives, even such a strong iron wall was forcibly torn open. There was a mistake in the connection, and a small number of Silver Pegasus Regiment warriors poured into the city. It could be seen how crazy and sharp the elves' attack was. Dismark even had an illusion. Was he fighting against the elves, or was he fighting against Sigund? With the sound of footsteps, 3 knights stepped onto the city wall one after another, slowly walking towards Dismark. The knight in the middle had white hair, a thin body, and a slight hunchback. His mental state was very sluggish, giving people a feeling of listlessness. However, he was wearing a heavy armor, which made him stagger when he walked, making people worry that the old man would be crushed by the armor at any moment. The knight on the left was a middle-aged man with a slightly dark face. He was tall and sturdy, graceful and dignified. At first glance, people could tell that he was a big shot who gave orders. However, he naturally followed the old man on the left, and the two were always half a step away from each other. The one on the right was a young man about 26 or 27 years old. His face was very handsome, but there was a layer of frost on his pink face. His eyes flashed with a fierce light, but with his age, his posture was a little pretentious. These 3 knights belonged to the 3 generations of the old, middle-aged, and young. They were all wearing the same heavy armor. Their footsteps were very strange. The moment the old man took a step forward, the middle-aged man also lifted his heel. When the old man's foot was about to touch the ground, it was the young man's turn to take a step forward. Instead of looking at their upper bodies, the footsteps of the 3 knights formed a very regular and stable wave. It was very easy to walk at the same time, and it could be done with a little training. The 3 knights' footsteps were not in sync at all, but gave people a sense of disordered beauty. Moreover, with their status, there was no need for them to train. It was just a tacit understanding. Lord Adonis, Lord Aud, Lord Amige, I'm sorry. Did those reckless elves disturb you? Dismark said with a smile. Lord Dismark, you're too polite. The old man smiled. Then he looked at the group of tree demons outside, then looked at the two sides of the city wall. The situation here doesn't seem optimistic. Yes, the elves' attack was too sudden, and I wasn't prepared at all. Dismark sighed. The three of you are the commanders of the Light Knight Regiment, and your experience in war far surpasses mine. I wonder, can the three of you give me some advice on what I should do at this time? The young knight, named Amige, was about to speak, but the old man cut him off first. I'm really sorry, Lord Dismark. We are just travelers who happen to pass by. We came here from afar, just to find Lord Jedis. Before we find Lord Jedis, we must remain neutral about everything that happens here. I think you understand what I mean. I understand, and I don't understand. Dismark's eyes were slightly sad. The Holy Crown City is a human city, and the Church of Light is also a human religion. As Holy Knight, can the three of you really watch as the elves ransack a human city? The young knight, named Amige, showed an angry look and suddenly took a step forward, but the old man grabbed Amige's arm. Under the old man's stern gaze, Amige had no choice but to step back. I'm sorry. The old man still said the same thing. Is that so? Dismark smiled helplessly. The battle is about to break out again. If the three of you don't want to help me, you'd better find a safe place to hide for a while. Seeing Dismark slowly walking to the other side of the city wall, the three knights looked at each other, and the old man, named Adonis, whispered, Amige, if nothing unexpected happens, Dismark will definitely talk to you tonight. Isn't that what we want? Amige smiled. Actually, we didn't have to wait until tonight. The middle-aged knight, Aud, continued. If the three of us suddenly attacked, we could definitely kill Dismark in an instant. Amige, what were you thinking? Why did you let go of this opportunity? Our priest group is still in the city. I'm worried. The elves have already launched an attack. If Dismark is killed, they will be able to take control of the city as soon as possible. This is not a reason. Amige sighed and said word by word. Because I don't believe that prudence, not at all. Is this reason enough? You don't believe? If you don't believe, then why did you agree to Prudence's plan? What's the point of us coming here? Odd. I've noticed that you've become more and more irritable in the past 6 months. It's not like you. The old knight Adonis whispered. Chapter 309. The middle-aged knight paused. Lord Adonis, you don't understand me. I don't understand? Adonis chuckled, looking like an old man with no self-respect, but the words he said made it hard for others to laugh. We fell into a trap together, ran away together with our tails between our legs, and relied on the sacrifice of our companions to save ourselves. What else do I not understand? Odd, you're already a middle-aged man, and I'm old. This shouldn't be a problem for us. If you can't even bear this much, you've lived in vain. In my opinion, it's Amige who has it the hardest. Such a young commander, TSK. He's also beautiful, powerful, and deeply trusted by His Holiness and Lord Jeds. Who knows how many young women have fallen for him? Correction, it's a young girl. Amige said, I don't have the same interests as you. Please don't force what you like on me. Adonis pretended not to hear and continued, such an idol, such a hero, also ran away with us like a dog. Odd, Amige is under much more pressure than you and me. You should relax a little. Do you have to use that as an analogy? Amige looked helpless. But it's because I'm young that I don't want to die. It's normal. You're so old, and you still ran away with us. It's really not easy. Even if you escape, how many years can you live? If I were you, I'd rather die in Moonlight City. At least I can preserve my reputation. Little bastard, Adonis glared. How dare you curse me and say that I won't live for many years? Both of you be quiet. Odd smiled bitterly. If this goes on, what part of us are Knights of Light? Odd. It seems that teaching you to relax is as difficult as teaching an orc to appreciate beautiful women. Forget it, I give up. Adonis shook his head. Amige, you really don't trust that prudence? I don't. Why? No reason. There has to be a reason, right? Adonis tugged at his sparse beard. Because he's taller than me, stronger than me, and more handsome than me. If that's the case, it is indeed unforgivable. Adonis nodded vigorously. Odur couldn't help but clench his fists. He had been in a bad mood all this time. Of course, the fiasco in Moonlight City was one of the reasons, but it was also related to the two guys in front of him. He was determined to find Jed's and find a way to restore the prestige of the Curia, but Adonis and Amijay talked nonsense all day long, which annoyed him to no end. Amijay, you're not suspecting Prudence just because of this, are you? He knew it was stupid to ask, because what Amijay said was definitely not the real reason, but there was no other way. He had to get to the bottom of this. Prudence is too perfect. Perfect temperament, perfect demeanor, perfect conversation style, and perfect story. That alone is enough to make people suspicious. Seeing Odo's impatience, Amij said in a low voice, "Even gods have flaws, let alone an elf." Only God knows how much effort Prudence put into pretending to be perfect. Also, why did he deliberately disguise himself? You're finished. Adonis gloated. You dare to blaspheme against God. I'll send you to the Supreme Court tomorrow. Sure, but who are you going to send to judge me? Both of you. Odur could no longer control his emotions and shouted. His voice was a little too loud, and the nearby mages and warriors all turned to look at them. A hint of disappointment appeared in Adonis' eyes. He was no longer smiling, but without the disguise, an indescribable weariness quickly appeared at the corners of his eyes and brows, seeping into his body. His back, which was already slightly crooked, became even more hunched. Actually, Prudence's story is not perfect. Oh, Amijay was stunned. You mean, remember how our little Louise, Panvin, and Blanche described Raphael? I remember, Amijay said. Panvin said that Raphael was an unfathomable person, and Louise and Blanche also said that Raphael was very powerful. It's more than powerful. Adonis' old eyes narrowed into slits. The Dragon Knight, Fo Nung, and the Golden Dragon Faragon went after little Louise and Panvin. After killing the Green Dragon, Fo Nung encountered Raphael. Raphael did not fight Fo Nung and quickly retreated, but before he left, he activated a strange magic circle. The Dragon Knight, Fo Nung, and the Golden Dragon Faragon were trapped for more than 3 hours. Do you know what that magic circle was made of? What? There were no runes, only 8 very ordinary small mirrors, and one of them was broken by Fo Nung. Impossible! How can it be called a magic circle without runes? Odur exclaimed. That's the truth, Adonis said softly. Adonis said softly, I asked Fo Nung what it felt like. Fo Nung told me that in his vision, the sky disappeared, the earth disappeared, and there were distorted rays of light everywhere. He couldn't see anything except the rays of light. He could only fly forward with all his might, but he couldn't fly out no matter how hard he tried. There was a period of time when he felt despair. That magic circle was that scary. It was not scary at all. Adonis shook his head. The key to the magic circle was the 9 small mirrors. Release any combat aura attack, and as long as any small mirror was destroyed, the illusory world formed by the magic circle would immediately disappear. That was what Fo Ning thought. But the question is, have you ever heard of such a magic circle before? No. A magic circle released in a hurry could trap the Dragon Knight, Fo Nung, and a Golden Dragon. Such a mage cannot be described as powerful, Adonis said slowly. Also, why did Lord Jed's only ask Raphael to warn us? Why didn't he ask anyone else? Because Lord Jed's learned about Raphael's strength through some opportunity? Amij asked, why would Lord Jed's place his hopes on a piece of trash? Isn't that right? Of course, he had to choose the most suitable one, Adonis said. And I think that Raphael has been holding back most of his combat power from the beginning to the end. Why? Didn't he already accept Lord Jed's request? He accepted the request to warn us, not help us, So there was no need for him to clash with Nicola's lackeys, Adonis said. And he is a lord with his own territory and people. It is already good enough that he is willing to spend time and energy to help Lord Jed's. Don't force your expectations on others. But what does this have to do with prudence? I'd ask. Raphael's strength is so terrifying, and he has gained Lord Jed's favor, huh? Adonis laughed. You have seen that Dismark. How could he defeat Raphael and force Raphael and Lord Jed's to hide in the abyss? No, even if Prudence wants to lie to us, why? What does he want? Also, Blanche wouldn't lie to us, right? Don't forget, Blanche is an elf, a mage continued. And don't forget, without the help of Blanche and the other elves, would we have been able to escape? Without us, those elves would have been killed long ago. Don't argue. This is a mess, Adonis said. I also believe that Blanche wouldn't lie to us. But who can guarantee that Prudence would tell her the truth? Aud frowned and thought hard. Why didn't you say so earlier? Amij smiled bitterly. Is this why you had to bring the priests out? Yes. I always felt that it was much safer inside than outside. At this point, Adonis' voice became much softer. The holy crystals are in our hands, and so is the hope of the Vatican. We can't be careless. We have already trusted Nicola wrongly, and we can't make the same mistake again. Speaking of the holy crystals, Amij and Aud's expressions changed. Their eyes were full of fanaticism and determination, and their bodies were straight. A powerful aura spread out from their bodies. Well, don't be so arrogant anymore, or you'll scare them. Adonis looked into the distance. Look, our perfect Prudence is about to perform again. The tree demons had not entered the attack range of the magic crystal cannons, and the Silver Pegasus Legion was still waiting for orders in the rear. A unicorn and a knight in a green cloak broke into the battlefield alone. The unicorn was far taller than a warhorse. Its entire body was snow white, and its pure fur fluttered in the wind. As its four hooves moved, there were faintly discernible arcs of electricity flickering around its body, giving it an incomparably majestic appearance. The Magic Legion of the Holy Crown City was not just for decoration, and the Holy Crown City was a very rich city. Dismark had built a relatively complete magic academy a long time ago, and it had cultivated a large number of talents. Every time there was a war, all the teachers and students in the academy would join the Magic Legion, increasing its combat effectiveness. Several magicians had already cast spells on Prudence, and the unicorn suddenly sped up and began to gallop forward along the city wall. Because of the distance, except for lightning, it was difficult to accurately hit Prudence with Fireball, Wind Blade, Meteorite, and other magic spells. However, it was a pity that Prudence was here to show his power. As a 12th grade powerhouse, he would not care about low-level magic at all. Finally, the curtain was pulled open, and the city had become a stage. It was Prudence's stage, and also the stage of magic. The ground under the unicorn's hooves sometimes turned into a pool of water, sometimes into a swamp, sometimes into a circle of swirling quicksand, and sometimes into a huge spider web. But none of these could stop the unicorn. Occasionally, a magician would release an earthen wall, which fulfilled Prudence's desire to perform. The unicorn let out a long hiss, and with a light leap, it could jump 7 or 8 meters into the air and calmly fly over the earthen wall. Prudence looked more at ease. His long, soft cloak was sometimes pulled straight, sometimes fluttering to the left and right. His extremely handsome face was always filled with a bright smile, and his slender and vigorous body was like a cheetah, giving people a feeling of strength and elegance. The finishing touch was on his forehead. In the middle of his forehead, there was a red, circular mark the size of a thumb. It was very bright and very conspicuous. Coupled with his pair of dreamy blue eyes, he was truly incomparably beautiful. That's right, pretty. If Han Jean was here and blocked the lower half of Prudence's body, he would definitely think that he was looking at an exquisite Indian dancer. It was said that the elves were a race full of neutral beauty, but he didn't expect that the descendant of the gods among them would be so different. Prudence's mark gave him a delicate and beautiful taste, and Sunir's hexagram filled her with a valiant aura. Bismarck frowned slightly. He saw through Prudence's intention, but there was nothing he could do. The overall strength of the human archers was far inferior to that of the elves, and their advantage lay in their magic. If the magicians couldn't stop Prudence, then the archers couldn't. Prudence continued to rush forward. When he rushed in front of Bismarck, he suddenly pulled his longbow, and a green arrow appeared at the bowstring. The mark on his forehead emitted a faint light, and then a faint green light shot out and disappeared without a trace. Prudence had lived for hundreds of years, and no one knew how many times he had repeated this action. The soldiers on the city wall could only see that Prudence seemed to move a little, but it was just a little. Bismarck coldly looked at Prudence, who was showing off his strength. He didn't care about his opponent's attack at all. No matter how strong the enemy was, he couldn't ignore the magic defense of the Holy Crown City. Suddenly, a green light bloomed in front of him. Prudence's arrow could break through the space barrier and appeared in front of him without any warning. Bismarck could even feel the coldness from the arrowhead. Unfortunately, in order to express his contempt, he deliberately crossed his arms in front of his chest. No matter if he wanted to dodge or shoot down Prudence's arrow, it was too late. At that moment, Bismarck raised his left arm and blocked the arrow with his knight's shield. With a loud bang, a dazzling green light exploded on Bismarck's knight's shield, and the soldiers and magicians on both sides all fell to the ground like rolling gourds. Bismarck couldn't help but step back a dozen steps. Every step he took left a deep footprint on the city wall, and the more he stepped back, the deeper the footprint became. When he finally stabilized himself, the city wall was no higher than his calves. Wisps of pure, ribbon-like light flowed out of Bismarck's knight's shield, and then became fainter and fainter. What was strange was that the armor around the knight's shield had been distorted by the arrow, but the knight's shield still remained as it was, shining as if it was new. Aud and Amagi's eyes flashed with a cold light, and they simultaneously pressed down on the long swords at their waists. The unicorn below the city wall leaped up again, and Prudence's fingertips had already reached into another quiver. The arrow in this quiver was somewhat strange. The shaft and arrowhead were exactly the same as the previous arrow, pure white as jade, but the end of the shaft was embedded with a feather of light. According to Prudence's attack speed, he could have released arrows continuously, but at this moment he paused, as if he was waiting for something. Cough, cough. Adonis bent over and coughed violently, as if he had been stimulated. Aud and Amagi looked at each other and let go of their sword hilts little by little. Prudence's eyes became sharp. He loosened his fingers and pulled out a green arrow from the quiver. He raised his hand, and the head of a magician on the city wall suddenly exploded into a mist of blood. The headless body stepped back and fell to the ground. Prudence continued to rush forward, and the arrows in his hands were also placed on the bowstring. 6 arrows ended the lives of 6 magicians. In Prudence's eyes, the magic barrier of the Holy Crown City was meaningless. Nearly 10,000 warriors and magicians on the city wall retreated to the battlements to avoid being killed by Prudence. On the other hand, the elves on the other side let out earth-shattering cheers that resounded through the sky. Bismarck strode back to the battlements and coldly looked at Prudence in the distance. His expression was still calm, but his hands were slightly trembling, and his chest was heaving up and down a little abnormally. At this moment, Bismarck was very, very angry. As a lord, he was almost killed by the enemy. This was an unforgettable shame. Prudence turned his unicorn around and quickly galloped away from the city wall. No one knew whether he was too lazy to vent his anger on the small fries, or because he had achieved the effect he wanted. Looking at Prudence's figure, Lydia showed a faint smile. Most elves were very beautiful, but Lydia was an exception. However, her face was disfigured. Disappointed, Lydia smiled. No matter if she was smiling or angry, her face always gave people a feeling of ferocity. A little. Prudence patted the unicorn's head to make it stop. Then he turned his head and looked at the holy crowned city in the distance. I didn't expect that those Saint Knight could resist the temptation of the holy gear. They have their own concerns, or perhaps their own suspicions, Lydia said calmly. Doubts? Prudence frowned. You mean, Blanche, it has nothing to do with her. She doesn't know anything about us. She even stupidly gave you the Moonwell. Lydia shook her head and sighed. It's strange. How could she live until now? Don't say that. It's too sad. Prudence smiled. We are all elves, aren't we? You? You don't look like one. Lydia shook her head. What do you mean? Prudence was still smiling, but the mark on his forehead was emitting a faint light. You know what I mean. So, you deliberately stopped me and let Sunir into the temple. You misunderstood. I have never seen Sunir. I didn't want to disobey the Great Elder's order. But the Great Elder asked you to keep an eye on Sunir, and you refused. I was showing respect, just like how I respect you now. You are all descendants of the gods. Today is the 30th. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope that this year will be better than last year, and better than the previous year. Of course, I should also bless myself. Chapter 3:10. Night had fallen, and neither the attackers nor the defenders were in the mood to continue the battle. The shouts and roars gradually subsided. Bismarck had proved how hard his shell was. Except for the destroyed 2 mage towers, the whole Holy Crown city was unscathed. Without breaking the defense enchantment of the Holy Crown city, the common attacks of the elves were hardly effective. What's more, Bismarck had rich battle experience. He had been fighting against various kinds of opponents for decades. As long as he was familiar with the attacking methods of the opponents, he could find a suitable countermeasure in the shortest time. The battlefield was a mess. Corpses of elves and Pegasi littered the ground. The Silver Pegasus Legion's attack power was very sharp. They came and went like lightning, but just as the Holy Knights had said, there was nothing perfect in this world. In order to maintain speed and reduce the weight of the Pegasi, the elves' defenses were very simple. They only wore very light leather armor, and even their shields were made of wood. Of course, if they were allowed to get close to mages and archers, their defenses would still cause great damage. However, if they were allowed to attack a city's defensive barrier, they would be the ones at a disadvantage. Some elves also tried to carry out reforms, but the result was always more harm than good. With heavy armor, the fighting power of the elves was sharply reduced. The Pegasi also lost the ability to glide, and even running became a problem. They were far slower than the running speed of the human knights. Moreover, even if the elves wore double-layered heavy armor, they still could not fight against the human knights because they had no fighting power. After strengthening the defense, giving up the attack and speed, the Silver Pegasus Regiment was completely reduced to a garbage troop. Therefore, every reform made by the elves ended in failure. From time to time, the roar of magic crystal cannons could be heard. It was the soldiers of the Holy Crown City attacking the elves who were cleaning the battlefield. After the battle, both sides sent small groups of soldiers to clean up the dead bodies of their companions on the battlefield with white flags. This was something that happened after the emergence of humanitarianism in the different worlds. Here, no one would care so much. Moreover, most of the dead in the Holy Crown City had fallen on the city wall. The other side was not qualified to negotiate with them. If they saw a shadow moving, they would just shoot. Compared to the Holy Crown City, the elves' camp was extremely quiet. There were no lights, no sentries, no patrols, as if all the elves had fallen asleep. Amidst the silence, Hanjin's figure slowly rose from the ground. He scanned his surroundings, and his gaze involuntarily locked onto a large black tree. A creaking sound was heard, and immediately, a dozen tree roots abruptly drilled out from the ground, sweeping toward Hanjin from various angles. Hanjin had an important matter to attend to, so he was not in the mood to fight with the enemy, nor did he have the energy to investigate the tree. He cast the earth-shrinking spell, and his figure disappeared from the spot and reappeared in midair. Then, Hanjin continuously cast the ground-shrinking spell. When a large number of elves rushed out of the camp, Hanjin had already risen to the sky. Then he cast another ground-shrinking spell and hid in a thick cloud. Hanjin was not the only one hiding in the clouds. There was also a majestic ship, the god of war. Seeing Hanjin's figure, Harley jumped up as if he had been electrocuted. He smiled and said, "Master, you are here." Little Gold Bolt also saw Hanjin. He jumped down from the ship's railing, spread his wings, and swayed towards Hanjin. In fact, Little Gold Bolt was approaching adulthood, and his height was almost the same as Hanjin's. The key was that everyone had seen Little Gold Bolt grow up little by little from the size of chicken. No matter how mighty Little Gold Bolt had become, people could not forget the original impression of him. So he could only be Little Gold Bolt. The other Thunderbirds were still obediently perched on the ship's railing. Only Little Gold Bolt dared to run around on the ship. No matter where it was, there must be its own rules. Thinking about it, if more than 100 Thunderbirds could run around and jump around, what would become of the god of war? When Morrison's almost trampled Little Gold Bolt to death, Yelena sympathized with him and asked Hanjin to take special care of him. That was how Little Gold Bolt became what it was today. In fact, if Hanjin had chosen another Thunderbird, it would definitely not be any weaker than Little Gold Bolt. Perhaps this was fate. Hanjin smiled and patted Little Gold Bolt's head. Little Gold Bolt folded his wings and used his sharp beak to rub against Hanjin's body affectionately. He was so strong that Hanjin's robe was full of wrinkles. After not seeing him for a long time, Hanjin could not bear to scold this little guy. He only used his fingertips to flick the beak that was rubbing against him, then looked at Harley. "How is it? Are the losses big?" "It's okay. What about these little guys?" "Not a single one is missing, Master." Harley secretly sighed. Fortunately, he managed to control Little Gold Bolt in time. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain himself. However, Hogan lost about a few hundred of his gargoyles. "Looks like you guys fought very fiercely back then." Hanjin's gaze fell on Domini. The Titans were one of the top races in the continent, and they had their own pride. Although she was living under someone else's roof, Domini could not act as seductively as Harley. She just sat there quietly and looked at Hanjin. Domini's left shoulder was wrapped in a layer of cloth, and there were faint traces of blood. Hanjin knew very well that Domini was the youngest Thunder Titan after Chasam in Cold Shadow City. The battle must have been very dangerous for Domini to be injured. Seeing Hanjin walk over, Domini hurriedly stood up, her expression somewhat restrained. "Sit down." Hanjin smiled and said, "I'm not used to looking up at people. You sitting down will make us feel more natural." Domini also smiled and sat down again. Hanjin's fingertips grabbed Domini's shoulder. Domini was shocked and subconsciously wanted to avoid it, but when she saw Hanjin's calm and gentle eyes, she inexplicably relaxed and allowed Hanjin to take off her shoulder. The Titans were extremely strong, and they were tall and large. The armor that Domingo was wearing was very thick, almost half a finger thick. If Domingo were to charge forward on flat ground, she would be no different from a humanoid tank. However, such heavy armor could not protect Domingo at all. There was a deep hole on her shoulder, which must have been penetrated by some kind of power. Hanjin observed the hole in her shoulder, then threw it on the deck and pinched the gauze on Domini's shoulder. You know healing arts?" Domini asked uneasily. "Healing arts?" Harley laughed. "Back then, Miss Yelena was ambushed. If it weren't for Master, she would have died. What's a little healing art to her?" In fact, Harley had never seen the scene. He had heard it from others. "Don't be nervous. Relax," Hanjin said as he peeled off the blood-stained gauze layer by layer. After the gauze was removed, smooth and white skin was revealed. However, the wound on her shoulder was shocking. It was almost the size of a bowl. If it had been an ordinary person, this blow would have blown off their entire shoulder. Fortunately, Domini was a Thunder Titan. Moreover, the wound did not scab over. In the blurry flesh, there were faint green stars flashing one after another. "An arrow wound?" Hanjin asked softly. "Yes." Domini nodded. "Did you see your opponent clearly? It's a male elf. He should be the same as Miss Sunir, a descendant of God." Also, he has activated the power of the mark, Domini said slowly. His arrow could have pierced through the magic barrier and the magic array you set up and hit me directly. Fortunately, I sensed something was wrong and dodged to the side. Otherwise, his arrow would have pierced my heart. A descendant of God? Han Jin's fingertips trembled uncontrollably. After a while, he sighed. I see. I think. I understand why they want to bring Sunir back. Master, who didn't see that scene. It was too spectacular. Hale shouted. Countless Pegasus warriors are like a boundless ocean wave, attacking the great god of war. Unfortunately, those Pegasus can only glide and can't fly very high. That's enough. Don't change the topic, Han Jin said lightly. Harley was speechless. He looked at Han Jin timidly. He wanted to continue changing the topic, but he could not find a suitable excuse. At this time, Hogan ran out from below and shouted in surprise and joy, Master, you're back. Yes. What are you doing down there? Hogan is making stone statue puppets, Harley hurriedly said. Han Jin glanced at Harley and didn't say anything. Harley's intentions were obvious. He was trying to hide something. However, after hearing about the descendant of God, his emotions had fluctuated greatly. Furthermore, he was treating Dominique and didn't have the energy to think about anything else. Harley and Hogan were both on the god of war, so it was impossible for them to escape. It will be the same to ask them later. Han Jin cast a spell, and one talisman after another entered Domini's wound. After waiting for a while, there were no changes to the wound. Han Jin frowned and thought for a moment. He waved at Harley. As soon as Harley came over, Han Jin used his finger like a knife and chopped down. Harley's left arm was cut off, and it turned into a gray mist. Han Jin used his sword finger to guide the gray mist to Domini's wound. Then he slapped it. The gray mist was slapped into Domini's wound by Han Jin's palm. Immediately, it turned into a thick liquid that was squirming nonstop. It looked extremely disgusting. After a while, Han Jin used his sword finger, and the gray mist was quickly pulled out. It floated motionlessly in the air, and countless green stars flickered in the mist. Han Jin clenched his right hand into a fist and punched out. The gray mist was shattered and scattered in all directions. However, it quickly gathered together. The green stars lost their support and fell to the deck one by one. Next, Han Jin started to cast the incantation again. Domini felt a chill on her shoulder, and the burning pain was fading. She tried to turn her head and found that the wound on her shoulder was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. She was dumbfounded. Seeing that Han Jin didn't need the gray mist anymore, Harley hurriedly stepped forward, opened his mouth, and sucked all the mist into his stomach without leaving a single strand. Thank you. Thank you, Domini said seriously. I should be the one thanking you. Han Jin smiled. Fortunately, you made a move. If it was Hogan who was hit by this arrow, he would have been killed. Hogan was stunned and slowly lowered his head. He wasn't stupid. He could hear the relief in Han Jin's words. In other words, Han Jin still cared about him. You've been hiding here all this time? Han Jin asked. Yes, master. It's good here. Those elves can't find us at all. Did you find anything? Found. Harley hesitated. Master, Wild Willow City is too strong. It's completely different for what Master Guevara said. Yes, master. Hogan continued. They also have green dragons. But for some reason, those elves didn't let them join the battle. Green dragons? Ideas appeared in Han Jin's mind one after another, but they were rejected one after another. The Battle of the Holy Crown City determined all the capital of Han Jin. If he won, he still had the power to fight and change. If he lost, he could only survive alone and hide in a place where no one could find him, silently practicing. When he succeeded, the world would have changed. What he cherished, what he missed, and what he wanted to grasp would all disappear. By then, even if he had the power to reach the sky, what was the point? When he was alive, no one cheered for him. When he was dead, no one cared about him. His life was not as good as spring flowers and autumn leaves. At least people saw the latter, paid attention to it, and were touched by it. Cultivation was not about destroying humanity. The old man who traveled far away on a green ox still needed the affirmation of Governor Ishi. Zhuangzhou, who liked to be free, also had Huishur, who was both a friend and a foe. Han Jin slightly narrowed his eyes and suppressed the fluctuations in his heart. Then he pushed with his hand, and a door appeared on the wall. The next moment, Han Jin slowly walked in, and the door gently closed, disappearing without a trace. This was a quiet room that Han Jin had specially opened for himself. It was also the only room on the God of War that was enchanted with arrays. Countless stars flashed in all directions. No matter what happened here, the people outside would not be able to sense anything. Han Jin's face gradually darkened. He then took off the pendant around his neck and raised his hand. The pendant trembled slightly and let out a pleasant sound. Then, extremely thin rays of light floated out from the pendant. The rays of light condensed and did not dissipate. Finally, they formed a blurry figure. "It seems that you're very interested in Jedis," Han Jin said lightly. "He is a devout, true believer," the figure replied in a weak voice. The silhouette replied in a weak voice. More and more light drifted out, and the silhouette gradually became clearer. Furthermore, a pair of pure white wings of light had grown out of his or her back. "Whether he is a believer or not has nothing to do with me." Han Jin's eyes flashed coldly. "But you shouldn't have tried to get close to him. You shouldn't have, you know. What you're doing is very dangerous." "Will it bring you danger?" "No, it will bring you danger. A true believer will not hurt me." "He won't, but I will." Han Jin's eyes suddenly widened, and then he shouted angrily, "Open!" The whole room turned into an endless starry sky in the blink of an eye. The surrounding stars lit up at the same time, and with Han Jin as the center, they spun rapidly. Chapter 311. In a rapidly rotating galaxy, the figure that was gradually becoming clearer was twisted and distorted. However, the flowing light seemed to have some kind of magical cohesion. When it was twisted, it would recombine, then be twisted again and recombine again. Furthermore, the figure was slowly approaching Han Jin. As expected, compassion is not good. Han Jin stood still and looked coldly at the approaching figure. "You have a heart of rebellion." God's grace. Carrying such heavy memories, I know you must be very tired. To you, dying is not only a form of liberation, but also a form of relief. Han Jin's eyes were bloodshot. His hands quickly formed a spell. Immediately, an exploding whirlpool swept him and the figure in front of him into it. On the deck of the God of War, Harley and Hogan were bored to death. Of course, Harley's expression did not change. Hogan, on the other hand, was absent-minded. He was always looking for unnecessary things to do. Sometimes he would stand at the side of the ship and look into the distance as if he could see through the clouds. Sometimes he would clean the magic crystal cannons. This kind of chores was not something a vice captain should do. After some time, Hogan finally could not help but ask, "Harley, are we really going to hide it from Master? Then what should we do? Should I tell him, or you?" Harley said unhappily, "Aren't you afraid? But Master will find out sooner or later." Sooner or later. Harley was stunned. "How about we kill those elves first and then throw them out?" "It has already happened." "This is not a solution," Dominique said. Obviously, she knew what Harley and Hogan were talking about. "Don't underestimate your master. He is very strong." "What does this have to do with being strong?" "Miss Dominique, this is a humiliation," Harley retorted. His body floated on the deck as if he didn't know what to do. Obviously, he was very conflicted in his heart. He had told Han Jin the whole thing, but he was afraid that he would be implicated. Was this a kind of betrayal? After a long time, Harley vented his anger on Hogan. "It's all your fault. You had to capture the captives. Now it's all good. You bastard." Hogan was angry and anxious. "You were the one who said that we should collect as much information as possible. I risked my life to capture the captives, and now you're blaming me?" If not you, are you blaming me? Harley shouted. What's the matter? A voice suddenly sounded. Harley and Hogan were both stunned. They never thought that Han Jin would come up at this time. What's the matter? Han Jin's voice became more severe. Harley and Hogan looked at each other and stammered. They didn't dare to say anything, but they also hoped that the other party would take the initiative to step forward. Han Jin was furious. He flicked his finger, and Harley immediately screamed in pain. His whole body twisted into a ball in pain. Hogan was also shocked and knelt down on the deck with a plop. Han Jin had retained Harley's memories, and Harley had helped him in some ways. Therefore, after obtaining the pendant, Han Jin did not erase the consciousness hidden in the pendant. As a result, the pendant tried to break free from his control and contact Jed's, which made him very angry. Now, Harley was following in his footsteps and trying to hide something from him. Han Jin began to wonder if his compassion and sympathy were really wrong. But Harley and Hogan were even more afraid. Han Jin had punished them before they could say anything. If they said anything, who knew what would happen to them? Let me say it. Dominique sighed softly. Her gaze stopped on Han Jin. Han Jin had not been down for long, but his face was pale and his eyes were full of fatigue. He must have done something that consumed a lot of energy. She should not say it now, but she had no reason to drag it on. Okay, I'm listening, Han Jin said slowly. Dominique took a few steps forward and stood in front of Han Jin. She was worried that Han Jin would lose his mind due to his rage and lead to an irreversible tragedy, so she had to protect Harley and Hogan at the critical moment. A few days ago, Harley suggested that we should gather as much information about the elves as possible, so Hogan risked his life to go down and capture a few captives. Dominique spoke very slowly. The southern elven tribes have already joined forces with Wild Willow City. Wait. Han Jin turned his cold gaze to Harley. You already knew? Are you playing dumb with me? How dare he say it? Lord Raphael, please let me finish. Dominique paused and finally made up her mind. The elves are very united, and their morale is very high. Because before the war, they held a grand wedding. Every elf believes that the rise of the Elven Empire is unstoppable. Oh, Han Jin replied with difficulty. You understand? Dominique looked at Han Jin nervously. She was ready to attack at any time, while Harley and Hogan both shrunk behind Dominique timidly. Of course, I understand. Han Jin smiled. You really understand? Dominique had a strange feeling. Han Jin's performance was far from what she expected. If she had known this earlier, why would Harley and Hogan hide? Yes. Han Jin lowered his head slowly. In reality, he didn't understand. When he drank the dragon blood for the first time, his consciousness and body were forcefully torn apart. Now, it was his heart that was being torn apart. Half of his heart wanted to roar and roar, while the other half wanted to reject and forget. It was hard for him to form a connection with Dominique's message in his mind. Lord Raphael? Dominique called in a low voice. A wedding of great significance will unite several elf tribes, won't it? Han Jin smiled. I understand. Even a fool could see how reluctant his smile was. He tried to control himself, but no matter how hard he resisted, rejected, soothed, or tried to cover it up, he couldn't suppress the pain. It was an unbearable pain, as if a knife was twisting in his heart. It was so painful that he couldn't breathe. He thought he was a tough warrior who would move forward resolutely in the world. Nothing could crush his will. He thought he could face everything calmly and calmly. He could take things and let them go. However, when he felt his throat burning and tried to swallow, something suddenly spurted out of his chest. Han Jin instinctively closed his mouth. A thin line of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. Lord Raphael, Dominique cried in shock. Master! Harley and Hogan's voices were trembling. They wanted to rush over, but they didn't dare to. Han Jin swallowed hard. He wiped the corner of his mouth with the tip of his finger. He stared blankly at the red on his fingertip and whispered, This is ridiculous. With his increasingly powerful vital energy, he could control his emotions. At least he wouldn't get hurt because of his emotions. However, he had just used up a lot of vital energy to seal the pendant. This news came at the right time and caught him off guard. Han Jin felt weak all over. Stars danced in front of his eyes. His heart seemed to have been torn into pieces by something. The pain was as excruciating as the eruption of magma. His chest felt like it was being pressed by a 10,000-pound boulder. Not to mention crying, even breathing was extremely difficult. The atmosphere was dead silent. Harley, Hogan, and Dominique didn't know what to say. Although Han Jin's reaction wasn't as intense as they expected, it clearly felt like there was nothing sadder than a dead heart. Han Jin slowly walked to the main seat. It was only a distance of 20 meters, but it took him more than a minute to walk. He then fell into the chair and slowly closed his eyes. After a while, Harley mustered up his courage and whispered, "Master, let's catch a few more elves and ask where Miss Sunier is. Then we'll go get Miss Sunier." "What's the point?" Hogan couldn't help but retort. "It's meaningful," Han Jin said slowly. "Huh?" Hogan's eyes widened. "If I can't get her heart, then I'll take her body. If I can't even get her body, then I'll take her life." Han Jin's hand gently stroked the armrest. Harley, Hogan, and the rest were all dumbfounded. Han Jin suddenly smiled. "What I'm doing, isn't it too extreme?" "Yes. Yes." Hogan's expression was very tragic. He looked like a martyr who was about to die. "Why would Miss Sunier betray you? It must be those elves." Han Jin's body suddenly stiffened. At the same time, the air became as heavy as lead. Compared to Hogan and Dormany, Harley was under the most pressure. He even felt like he was about to collapse. "You're right. Let's talk about this later." Han Jin softly said, "Hogan, where are those green dragons?" "You're going to find those green dragons?" Hogan anxiously asked. "Master, you can't. There are more than 10 of them. I'm about to lose control. I have to do something," Han Jin calmly said. "Or, do you want me to vent my anger here?" I... Hogan was so anxious that the veins on his forehead were throbbing. If he didn't say anything, the first person Han Jin would kill would be him. If he said anything, going against more than 10 giant dragons by himself was no different from suicide. "Tell him." Dormany sighed. "What? What did you say?" Hogan looked at Dormany angrily. "Tell him," Dormany repeated. As a Thunder Titan, her observation skills were much better than Hogan's. Han Jin was indeed about to lose control. She also understood Han Jin's fighting ability. More accurately, Han Jin was a human abyssal demon. As long as he didn't completely lose his mind, he had a high chance of escaping the battlefield, even if his opponents were more than 10 giant dragons. Hogan helplessly stretched out his arm and pointed to the northwest. They should still be there. Han Jin pushed himself up from the chair and slowly walked to the side of the ship. Not to mention Harley, Hogan, and the others, even Little Gold Thunder was filled with fear of Han Jin at this moment. It swayed to the side, but it wasn't willing to give up. It turned its head to observe Han Jin seriously and kept making low cries. No one knew if it was trying to persuade Han Jin or express something. Han Jin stepped onto the side of the ship. Dormany suddenly said, "Master Raphael, I can understand how you feel, but please don't forget that there are many people who care about you and need you. Just like how you can't bear the result of losing Miss Sunier, they can't bear the pain of losing you." "What is this? Comfort? Warning?" Han Jin turned around and looked at Dominique with a smile. "No, it's a request." Dormany took a deep breath. "Please stay calm. At least know what you're doing. At least don't hurt those who care about you." Han Jin didn't answer. His body fell backward and disappeared into the clouds. Hogan and Harley cried out in shock and rushed to the side of the ship, but they couldn't see Han Jin's figure anymore. "It's all your fault," Harley screamed. "Blame me? Master will find out sooner or later. It's better than now," Harley yelled. If Master Guevara and Morrison's were here, they would definitely be able to persuade Master. Hogan was speechless. Han Jin had always respected Guevara and had a deep friendship with Morrison's and the others. In comparison, the two of them were only Han Jin's slaves. Although Dormany's status was more noble, she had only joined for a short time and didn't have any feelings for him. She didn't have the right to persuade Han Jin. If Guevara was here, things wouldn't have gotten to this point. Han Jin did not use any Taoist arts, but his body continued to fall. He even had an impulse to keep falling to the ground like this. Perhaps it could reduce the pain of thousands of arrows piercing through his heart. Would killing all the elves save them from this tragedy? Impossible. If Sunir was willing, he would be in pain because Sunir betrayed him. If Sunir wasn't willing, he would be in even more pain. He couldn't even protect his lover. How could such a piece of trash want to conquer the world? Hanjin slowly closed his eyes and listened to the thunder-like wind blowing past his ears. He knew that Dormany was right. He also wanted to calm himself down, but he couldn't. The closer he got to the ground, the more ferocious Hanjin's expression became. Suddenly, an angry roar exploded between heaven and earth. Then a green light fell straight down like a waterfall from the Milky Way. With a loud bang, the green light hit a lush tree. From top to bottom, the entire tree was blown to smithereens. The smoke rose dozens of meters into the air. The green light had already turned into a giant sword. The blade was more than 3 meters wide. The bottom half of the blade was deeply embedded in the ground. Hanjin stood on the hilt of the sword, his clothes fluttering in the wind. His emotionless eyes swept across the entire camp. The horns sounded again and again, and countless elves rushed out from all directions. Hanjin once again let out an earth-shattering roar and dove into the elves' camp. The 20-meter-long giant sword wasn't suitable for him to display a variety of sword moves. Hanjin only had one move, horizontal sweep. Under the control of Hanjin's sword fingers, the giant sword turned into a whirlpool of death with Hanjin at the center. It suddenly spun to the east, then to the west. All the elves, Pegasi, and Treants that were sucked and were torn to shreds. That's... Blanche looked into the distance and suddenly cried out. That's Raphael. What's going on? Why is he attacking us? With that, Blanche pulled a Pegasus over. Wait. A hand reached out from the side and grabbed Blanche's arm. Lydia, let go of me. Let me stop him. Blanche struggled. Let go. What right do you have to stop him? Lydia said calmly. We were friends. Friends? Lydia showed a helpless expression. It's useless. I can guarantee that if you appear in front of him, he won't hesitate to kill you. Why? Blanche was stunned. Because he hates elves. Ha! He hates all elves. How can this be? Blanche struggled to speak. We used to get along very well. Do you know Sunir? Of course I know. I attended her wedding with Prudence. Because he likes Sunir. Blanche was stunned for a moment before her expression turned to one of anger. Lunatic. Demon. Sunir has the right to choose. Why is he doing this? Does he think he can do whatever he wants just because he's an ultra-class? Let go of me. The problem is Sunir likes him too. Blanche was dumbfounded. After a long while, she stuttered. Then why did Sunir marry? That's not Sunir. The real Sunir is still in the temple. Lydia smiled. Blanche's mind couldn't keep up. So, it's all a misunderstanding. That's great. Let me go. I'll tell him. It's not a misunderstanding. The day Sunir comes out of the temple is the day she marries Prudence, whether she wants to or not, Lydia said slowly. What's the point of explaining it now? What do you want? It's not me, it's the Grand Elder. He wants to marry Sunir to Prudence. That's their deal. Are you all crazy? I told you that Raphael is very powerful. Even if we can't be friends, we can't let him become our enemy. Will the First Elder and Prudence listen? They believe that it's time for the Elven Empire to rise. They want to save the declining elves. It's a good idea, but they've chosen the wrong path, Lydia said slowly. That's why we have to choose another path. Blanche, are you willing to help me? Blanche stared blankly at Lydia, then turned her gaze to the battlefield in the distance. There's no need to look. This is the lesson they deserve. They've been blinded by their passion. I hope today's events can cool them down. Lydia's expression was indifferent. They don't want to admit that the elves can no longer rule the continent. How many elves and how many humans are there on the continent? How many powerhouses were there among the elves? And how many powerhouses were there among the humans? If we lose, we'll lose everything. If Raphael loses, there's still Dismark and the capital of elements. And how powerful will Nicola become in a few years? If we can't find our place, all our efforts and sacrifices will be in vain. We have no right to fight. We can only choose to cooperate. Chapter 312. Under the night sky, death and destruction formed a symphony. It turned out that hell did not only exist in the imagination. Hanjin controlled the sword with his fingers. When his fingers moved an inch, the giant sword could sweep across dozens of meters of space. Wherever the sword passed, sand and stones would fly, and flesh and blood would splatter. No matter if it was the elves who rushed out, the Pegasi who ran in panic, or the Trance who surrounded him while howling, or the ancient war trees driven by the elves, no life could withstand Hanjin's attack. In the past, Hanjin was like a stingy ghost. He always carefully calculated the consumption of energy. A stingy ghost would not waste a single copper coin, and Hanjin would not waste a single bit of energy. But now, Hanjin was unrestrained. It was a kind of unrestrained unrestraint. The pressure, grief, confusion, and fear that had accumulated for a long time were all released at this moment. Extreme pain and crazy venting. Hanjin was immersed in a strange state of mind. His mind was blank, as if he had sealed off his six senses. But he could clearly feel every change in his surroundings. The splattering flesh and blood, the falling leaves, and even the rolling sand and stones were particularly clear. He forgot his responsibilities and goals. He even forgot his name. He forgot life and death. He did not know anything, but he knew everything. In the distance, nearly 100 elves galloped over. They were all riding unicorns. The leader was Prudence. When they were still 1,000 meters away, Prudence had already taken off the longbow on his back. At the same time, Hanjin seemed to have sensed danger. His body instantly sank into the ground and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Beside a quiet pool, a female elf sat gracefully on a tree stump. She held a tall golden harp in her arms. Her delicate fingertips gently plucked the strings. The music was elegant and low, spreading far and wide in the night. There was also a giant dragon lying on the edge of the pool. Its eyes were half open, and its huge body was motionless. It was as obedient as a puppy. After a long while, the giant dragon slowly stretched its body. Ifong, thank you. After listening to your music, I feel much better. Jared, it seems like your companions don't really welcome you. The elf named Yvonne said with a smile. It can't be helped. They belong to Dragon City, and I belong to Dragonfield. The giant dragon's voice became coarse. But you're all dragons. Why do you have to? Speaking of which, we won't be able to finish talking for a few days and nights. Forget it. The giant dragon slowly crawled on the ground again. Yvonne, can you play another song for me? All right, as long as you're willing to listen. Ifong thought for a moment, and her delicate fingertips quickly strummed the strings of the zither. As if she could feel the other party's mood, the melody this time was very happy. The music was as clear and lively as spring water. The fairy and the giant dragon were immersed in the music, and they didn't notice the slowly rising figure at all. After another song, Jared lazily spread his wings. Just as he was about to say some words of praise, he suddenly discovered a figure behind Ifong. He immediately roared, "Human!" Jared was an adult giant dragon. Excluding his tail, his body was more than 10 meters long. With this roar, turbulent air currents surged out like wild winds, and circles of ripples appeared on the surface of the lake. Ifong couldn't help but take a few steps back. The golden harp lost its support, and it tilted to one side, letting out chaotic, vibrating sounds. Your music is very nice. Hanjin reached out to support Ifong. Ifong was just about to thank him when she suddenly felt her neck tighten. Her body then flew up, crashing directly toward Jared. Jared was shocked. He extended his claws in a relatively clumsy manner to catch Ifong. The next moment, a dazzling green light suddenly bloomed between heaven and earth, turning into a giant sword that was more than 20 meters long and slashed toward Jared's abdomen. No creature was perfect. The dragon race had extremely powerful attacks, and their defense was also one of the best among creatures of the same level. However, their bodies were too large. If it were an abyssal demon or a creature with a smaller body, it would have been able to dodge Han Jin's attack. However, Jared was forced into a corner. In the midst of a furious roar, Jared caught Yifeng while swinging his left wing toward the giant sword. With a loud bang, the giant sword was swept away by Jared's left wing, and it spun dozens of meters away. Jared spun around on the spot and staggered to the ground. It was obvious that giant dragons were not suitable for learning to dance, even though the movements were very simple. Yifeng, run! Jared roared angrily and struggled to get up. His flapping left wing was already covered in blood, and there was a crack that was a few meters long. Yifeng did not dare to stay any longer. She lifted her skirt and rushed into the forest, disappearing in a few flashes. Han Jin waved his hand, and the giant sword condensed into a green light again, and quickly flew toward Han Jin. Human, why are you attacking us? Jared straightened his body, and his eyes, which were almost the size of a wash basin, stared at Han Jin condescendingly. Although music and battle were two completely different things, Jared liked both. Moreover, he was very experienced in battle. After just one round, he had already determined that his opponent was very powerful. Therefore, he did not rush to attack and try to delay as much as possible so that Yifeng could escape further away. I need your dragon crystal and your blood, Han Jin said calmly. He realized that there was something wrong with his state of mind. In the past, he relied on his own will to control his state of mind, but now there was nothing. Emotions such as happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy did not exist at all. Jared's body stiffened, and he felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. However, there was something boiling in his head. That was anger. Anger caused by his dignity being trampled on. However, Han Jin's expression was so calm, as if what he said just now was not much different from saying that he wanted to eat or drink. Jared instinctively knew that it was not the first time that Lin Huang had done such a thing. Dragon Slayer? Jared's gaze fell on the green light, and he suddenly remembered something. You are Raphael? Yes. Jared took a step back and then opened his mouth. A bright red wave of fire suddenly shot out from his mouth, and with the deafening sound of wind and thunder, it surged towards Han Jin. The dragon's breath was very terrifying. Its temperature, impact, and lethality were comparable to the top-level fire magic released by a magician. The moment the dragon's breath landed on the ground within a radius of dozens of meters cracked and turned into crystal-clear mirrors. That was the result of the sand and stones melting. The heat waves swept in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, the forest was roasted yellow and then burned. However, Han Jin had already disappeared. Jared did not know what was going on, and hurriedly took a few steps back, nervously on guard. Yifeng, who was holding her long dress, used all her strength. Although she was not a combat elf, her speed was much faster than an ordinary human. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of Yifeng. Yifeng was caught off guard, and she bumped into the back of the figure. Before she could cry for help, she felt that her shoulder was grabbed tightly, and then in the dazzling green light, she was lifted into the sky. Save me! Save me! Yifeng cried with all her might, but she didn't dare to struggle. That hand was too strong. She even felt like her bones were about to be crushed. Furthermore, she was afraid of heights. Looking at the forest below her, she felt weak all over and didn't have the strength to struggle. Jared heard the cry for help and turned back to see that Yifeng had been caught. He suddenly let out an angry roar and spread his wings to chase after them. Han Jin ignored Jared behind him and continued to fly forward. In fact, his speed on the sword was not as fast as that of a giant dragon. However, Jared's left wing was torn, which severely affected his flying ability. Although Han Jin had an extra person with him, he still had to slow down a little to maintain the distance between him and Jared. One chased while the other fled, and in a moment, they had already flown for more than 10 miles. Han Jin suddenly stopped and turned around to look coldly at Jared, who was flying closer and closer. Seeing that Han Jin had stopped, Jared hurriedly slowed down and said, "Human, this is a battle between you and me. It has nothing to do with Yifeng." Han Jin turned to look at Yifeng and did not answer. Yifeng is a peace-loving elf. She is not a warrior. Let her go. Jared's voice became more anxious. Peace-loving? This is my territory, isn't it? Why would a peace-loving elf barge into my territory? Han Jin smiled and said, "But I can let her go." Jared suddenly had a bad feeling. After saying that, Han Jin suddenly let go of his hand. Yifeng let out an ear-piercing scream, and her body fell straight to the ground. No! Jared's body suddenly sped up, and he flew diagonally downwards. If he did not have the strength of a top-tier powerhouse, he would definitely die from falling from a height of a few hundred meters. Han Jin looked at Jared's figure expressionlessly. When Jared was about to reach Yifeng, he flipped his wrist, and the green light appeared again. He chased after Jared from the sky, and the 3-meter-wide sword tip was pointed at the back of Jared's neck from afar. To Jared, this was a difficult choice. If he caught Yifeng, he would not be able to defend himself against Han Jin's attack. If he did not care about Yifeng's life, his perseverance would become meaningless. However, he had to admit that he had chased after Yifeng all the way here and immediately chased after her to save her out of impulse. When it was a matter of life and death, Jared was a little hesitant. "Save me." Seeing that Jared was chasing after her, Yifeng cried tears of joy, and she extended her arms to Jared. A ferocious look flashed across Jared's basin-like eyes. He raised his head and spat out a mouthful of dragon's breath. He had already thought it through. Even if he could save Yifeng now, he would not be able to fight against the enemy anymore. When the time came, both of them would be killed, so he might as well give up. The crimson wave of fire instantly engulfed the giant sword. At the same time, Han Jin's face turned pale. He pointed his finger, and the giant sword turned into a dazzling green light. It forcefully pierced through the wave of fire and flew upwards at high speed. The joy in Yifeng's eyes had already disappeared and was replaced by endless despair. She desperately tried to grab at the sword with her arms, but to no avail. Her figure became smaller and smaller, and finally, she fell to the ground with a loud thud. "I have overestimated you." Han Jin coughed softly, and a trickle of blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth. He had already used up a lot of his vital energy to seal that pendant, and he had also suffered internal injuries. He had just experienced an intense battle, and now he was already at the end of his rope. Furthermore, his flying sword was connected to his mind. When the flying sword received an attack that was beyond what it could withstand, it would also cause damage to him. Jared's eyes turned red. It was not clear whether it was because of the fire from the dragon's breath, or because it could not contain its anger. Its wings flapped wildly, and its body spun rapidly. From the bottom, it charged straight towards Han Jin. Han Jin sneered. He formed a spell and released the ground shrinking spell. His body disappeared from the spot, and at the same time, he appeared on the ground. Jared had lost its target. It circled in the air for half a circle, and when it realized that Han Jin was standing on the ground, it immediately changed its direction and charged toward Han Jin. Han Jin did not move. He could temporarily suppress his internal injuries, but the vital energy that he had used up could not be replenished quickly. He was already at the end of his rope and could only choose to take the risk. The distance between the two was getting closer and closer. When it was only about 50 meters, Jared opened its mouth again, and a stream of dragon's breath poured down like a waterfall. Han Jin still did not move. The flashing green light enveloped his entire body. Although the protective sword light was not enough to resist the dragon's breath, it could at least ensure that he would not be burned by the hot air. Seeing that the crimson dragon's breath was about to cover Han Jin's head, Han Jin's body suddenly sank. With a boom, the dragon's breath hit the ground, and the water in the soil evaporated instantly, turning into countless cracked crystals. At this moment, Jared's body was less than 30 meters from the ground, and it could no longer change its direction. Its heavy body landed on the ground, shattering the cracked crystals into pieces. Jared raised its head and looked around for Hanjin. Unexpectedly, Hanjin appeared in front of Jared. That was Jared's blind spot, and no one could sense Hanjin's breath. Jared could not find Hanjin at all, and was still looking around. Wishful, 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 frighten the gods and ghosts. Hanjin chanted silently and waved his right hand. Go! A black light shot out like a spiritual snake and instantly wrapped around Jared's legs. Hanjin's body sank into the ground again. Jared felt the pain coming from his leg and hurriedly tried to move forward, but he fell to the ground with a loud thud. Hanjin's immortal binding rope couldn't tie up Jared's entire body. It could only tie up his legs, but that was enough. Jared knew that it was facing an unprecedented crisis. It struggled with all its might and roared. Its huge body rolled around on the ground, and it kept hitting the ground, creating huge pits. It was even spitting dragon's breath randomly. However, Jared's weight was in the tens of thousands of kilograms, and there was no way it could stand up again. Hanjin's figure appeared 100 meters away, and there was a sarcastic smile on his face. He quietly watched Jared's final struggle. The god-tying rope was getting tighter and tighter, and it even dug deep into Jared's flesh. Jared's eyes suddenly flashed with a hint of determination. It opened its mouth and spat out a dragon's breath. A bright red wave of fire rolled toward its own legs. Hanjin did not expect Jared to harm itself. His body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Withdraw! Hanjin shouted angrily. The god-tying rope immediately left Jared's body and swam toward Hanjin. The light flashing on the god-tying rope had become very dim. Jared struggled to raise its head and glared at Hanjin. The dragon's breath was very powerful, and even it could not withstand it. The muscles on its legs were burned into a bloody mess, and even its bones were exposed. However, Hanjin's condition was not much better than Jared's. After withdrawing the god-tying rope, he could not help but spit out 2 mouthfuls of blood, and his body became wobbly. Jared used its wings and front claws to support itself on the ground, and slowly crawled toward Hanjin. Its hate-filled eyes were fixed on Hanjin. It thought that his opponent was just a dragon slayer who did not live up to his name. If not for his shameless tactics, it would not have been injured so badly. Little did it know that Hanjin had already used up a lot of vital energy before the battle. If Hanjin had maintained his full strength, it would have been killed long ago. Hanjin wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and raised his head with difficulty. At this moment, he could not even straighten his back. When the flying sword was attacked by the dragon's breath, he reacted in time, and the backlash was not very serious. However, the god-tying rope was really refined by the dragon's breath. It was even almost destroyed on the spot, and his mind was a little muddled. Not bad. You are very tenacious. Hanjin cast a spell, and 3 white fireballs appeared out of nowhere and shot toward Jared. Jared immediately sensed that the fireballs were very strange. It opened its mouth and spat out another dragon's breath. The 3 fireballs were crushed by the dragon's breath and turned into countless sparks that fell to the ground. However, the sparks did not extinguish and were still burning quietly. Jared realized that his opponent's injuries were not as serious as it had thought, and it could not help but stop. The man and the dragon stared at each other. Hanjin did not dare to use his vital energy, which was almost exhausted, and Jared did not dare to get close to Hanjin. After a moment of silence, Hanjin threw out 2 talismans, and 2 tall wooden puppets appeared beside him. At the same time, they walked toward Jared from both sides. Jared suddenly raised its head. It did not know what was the most terrifying thing. It did not know what Hanjin's intention was, and it did not know the combat power of the 2 strange puppets. It could only be on high alert. Just as the 2 wooden puppets came to Jared's sides, they suddenly burst into flames and rushed toward Jared. Jared was shocked and hurriedly spat out a dragon's breath. The wooden puppet on the left was instantly burned to ashes. Then Jared turned to the right, paused, and spat out another dragon's breath. Only the superior dragons could master the dragon language magic. The inferior dragons, such as the green dragons and the red dragons, could only release dragon's breath. Although it was a little monotonous, it was enough to dominate the continent. However, it was difficult to release dragon's breath continuously. At least, the inferior dragons could not do it. Hanjin was betting on this. Hanjin immediately cast the ground shrinking spell and appeared in front of Jared. A red light shot out and shot into Jared's mouth. Hanjin turned his wrist, and another white light chased after it. A stone stirred up 1,000 waves. Jared's neck suddenly swelled up like a balloon. Then, with a boom, the dragon's head detached from its neck and flew dozens of meters away. Countless sword shadows shot in all directions, cutting the air and bombarding the ground. Jared's huge body kept trembling in the sword shadows. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.